It is 7 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
With Sophy and Wilf, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
The Prime Minister tells the billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe to apologise for his comments about immigrants using the benefits system. Nigel Farage says Labour is ignoring the issue.
Sean Dyche is out at Nottingham Forest after just 114 days in charge, the third coach to leave the Premier League club this season.
Police in Canada say the suspect behind a deadly school shooting was an 18-year-old school dropout and transgender woman with a history of mental problems. No word yet on any motive.
The latest GDP figures have just dropped. We'll break them down for you in just a moment.
And we'll be talking about a sister dying on the show with an emotional interview about the case in favour of a change to the law.
GDP figures for December and with it for the fourth quarter have just crossed. So for the fourth quarter of last year, GDP came in at 0.1%, so just above the flat line. The forecast had been for a little bit better than that for 0.2%, so it's a little worse than forecast. And Q3 had been a bit better than that, had been the same as that, 0.1%. So the second half of last year, 2 quarters of 0.1% growth, just above the flat line. The month of December itself, which of course rounded out the fourth quarter, 0.1%, that was expected. If we just dive into the individual line items for Q4 as a whole, services was flat. Production was quite good, up 1.2%. Construction was bad, down 2.1%. What I would say, sort of stepping back from all of this, is we now have all of the data in the post-budget period. The budget, of course, was late November, and December didn't see any significant pickup after the budget. Uncertainty had gone away. In December itself, we just saw 0.1% of growth. So there wasn't a sort of post-budget bounce.
And, I mean, just to sort of state the obvious, 0.1% growth, that's pretty disappointing. It's like
as low as you can.
Yeah.
Without it being negative,
yeah.
I guess you could say 0.0 with that, but yeah. Two quarters in a row, third quarter last year, fourth quarter last year of 0.1 is very disappointing. Yeah. You can't do anything as a country, really, if that was what we had going long term. Have to hope now it picks up this year.
Yeah. To our other big story today, because Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who's one of the richest men in the UK, he's the part owner of Manchester United, he's told Sky News that he thinks the UK has been colonised by immigrants and it's costing too much money. Well, the Prime Minister has demanded an apology, saying his comments were offensive and wrong. The Manchester United Supporters Trust also voicing concerns.
It's all part of a wide-ranging interview that Ed Conway has done with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, where he also called for courage from politicians to make difficult but necessary decisions on issues like the rising welfare bill, and said we need somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out. Let's have a listen here to Sir Jim Ratcliffe talking to Ed.
If you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things which are unpopular and show some courage.
And has this government done that?
No, I think they I don't know whether it's just the apparatus that hasn't allowed Keir to do it, or he's maybe too nice. He's a nice. I mean, I know Keir. He's a nice man. I like him, but it's a tough job, and I think you have to do some difficult things with the UK to get it back on track, because at the moment, I don't think the economy is in a good... You can't afford... you can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause... It'll cause... Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. Now it's 70 million. That's 12 million people.
You met recently with Nigel Farage, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in. But, I think it needs somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out, would be my view.
Omara's here to discuss this. I mean, people like Sir Jim Ratcliffe don't normally do interviews, and I think perhaps we're kind of starting to see from that why that might be. I mean, firstly, the comments on colonisation, there's been a real political backlash to that, right?
Yeah, there really has. There's been quite a lot of kind of shock and anger at some of those comments and what people feel that he was insinuating. So Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has done a big kind of tweet where he says, offensive and wrong, Britain is a proud, tolerant and diverse country. Jim Ratcliffe should apologise. And then, interestingly, Nigel Farage has reacted quite differently, and he put out a statement where he said, Britain has undergone unprecedented mass immigration that has changed the character of many areas in our country. Labour may try to ignore that, but reform won't. And then the Lib Dems also came out and said it was totally wrong and that Jim Ratcliffe should apologise as well. So if you look at the spectrum of reaction, I think what's fascinating is reform is not condemning or trying to brand what Jim Ratcliffe has said as wrong. They are basically trying to say, actually, he might have a point, and we are the party with the courage to actually say, perhaps he's right, whereas Labour and Lib Dems very much wanting to say, hold on a second, this is far beyond acceptable language and rhetoric, and we want to call it out straight away. I think what's really interesting is how little we've heard from the Conservative Party. So far this morning, we've tried to get in touch with the Tories, and they haven't really given us anything.
That's interesting.
And I think it's interesting because I think they are going to be very careful about wanting to be attacked from reform by trying to, potentially say that, Labour and Tory, just neither of them have the courage to face up to these difficult conversations. So I think Tories are going to be thinking very hard about how to nonetheless show their voters that, hold on a second, we don't want to demonise immigrants, but necessarily also not alienate people who are minded to go to reform because they know they are bleeding voters in that direction.
He also got his statistics wrong, which I think makes the use of that word colonisation even worse, because he was talking about a 12 million increase. He said from 2020 to 2026. I think he meant from 2000 to 2026, and then his numbers would have been closer to accurate, which I think only makes the inflammatory use of colonisation even worse. The part though at the end there is quite interesting about the need. It followed a part, by the way, talking about Manchester United and taking tough choices, and he was claiming starting to see a bit of a pickup on the pitch just in the last few games, so it's a bit generous.
They have been doing quite well.
Yeah, but 4 or 5 games after, a year and a half. Anyway, but saying you need to take tough choices and be unpopular, as he has been and been booed in the stands, and that isn't something he sees the government doing, which is, again, quite timely at a moment in time where, the Prime Minister's probably going to have to do what the left of his party wants for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think what was interesting was he was trying to argue that we need more courage in politics. We need parties that are willing to, what do we hear in the election, make tough decisions and actually do them. And I think the problem is that Labour is incredibly unpopular, but not necessarily for taking all of their tough decisions, because most of those tough decisions were actually U-turned anyway. They've become unpopular for many reasons we haven't got time to get into. But I think he was trying to argue that actually we need more politicians who are willing to say unpopular things, say things that might sound, offensive or might be considered a little bit radical if we're going to get out of this hole and look at those GDP
But it's also, I guess, doing things that might be unpopular in the short term as well, right? So, if you're looking, there's all kinds of kind of long-term issues you can see in the country, whether it is, the welfare bill, for example, something that Keir Starmer tried to tackle and was not allowed to by his own MPs. We're talking about special educational needs on the programme recently. That's another thing that, they've got this bill that's going up, no real kind of long-term plan to get it down. I guess from that perspective, he's got a bit of a point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, it's such a good interview. It's about 18 minutes long, well worth checking out on the Sky News website. It starts, and a lot of it, which Ed knows, better than probably anyone other than Jim Ratcliffe, about the lack of manufacturing in this country and the decline of that. And so he started coming at it from that angle, which is he makes the point that manufacturing in the 90s was over 20% of our GDP. It's now only 8%, and goes through the factors that have hollowed that out. And at the same time is saying, and yet they're not, making any of the other kind of business decisions we need to make. So it's well worth watching the full interview from Jim Ratcliffe.
And let's not forget, it was only a couple of days ago Wes Streeting was releasing his WhatsApps, basically saying they have no growth strategy. Now you've had GDP figures out this morning, basically almost no growth, and you can start to see a pattern. And I think the difficulty is that there is an element of truth, as you were saying, in what Jim Ratcliffe has said, and then the difficulty is that some of the other things he said are so much more controversial that you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, perhaps. But that's politics, right?
Yeah.
All right, great stuff.
True.
Thank you.
Now, we've all been getting a bit carried away on the programme about a kind of long read on social media about AI that's gone viral, right?
Yeah, we have been talking about it over the last couple of days. It outlines quite a bleak kind of future, potentially, while transformative, potentially quite dangerous future of AI.
Yeah, and it could be arriving this year, apparently. And we are joined by a man who knows all about this, Adrian Wolfson. He says that we've already crossed what he describes as a monumental threshold, and everything is about to change like never before in human history. That is going to be fascinating, so stay around for that one.
Now, we're mentioning Manchester United briefly, one club that did change its manager, of course, recently to a good effect in the short term. Was Man U. Now, there's been two more.
Yeah.
Yesterday, just as we came off air, we got the news that Tottenham had got rid of Thomas Frank, but also late yesterday, Nottingham Forest have gotten rid of their manager, Sean Dyche.
Yeah, the stat that is absolutely incredible is that this is their third manager of the season that has been booted out. So, their patience is running thin, I think it's fair to say.
And Postecoglou, of course, started... no, other way around. Nuno Espirito Santo, Ange Postecoglou, Sean Dyche. And Ange Postecoglou, of course, has managed both Tottenham and Nottingham Forest. So he's probably sitting there today saying, see, I told you, these owners are hard to work for, with both those clubs getting rid of their coaches yesterday. I mean, Forest to get through 3 and win only at February is mad.
It's absolutely extraordinary. When February, I mean, it's just, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And then all eyes, of course, on who gets the new jobs as well. Could it be Oliver Glasner, Crystal Palace manager, going to Spurs? Yeah,
which would be tough for them. They've lost some of their players. They're going to lose the manager too. I mean, both clubs obviously have slid down the table, only just above the relegation zone. That's why these owners have acted, of course. We will keep an eye on who might be next to go.
Yeah. Now, we want to bring you an update on a breaking story from yesterday, and actually this is a very, very tragic story. We know more now about the suspects behind that deadly school shooting in Canada, because police say 18-year-old Jessie Van Rootselaar was a school dropout and a transgender woman.
The suspect's mother and stepbrother were found dead at a nearby home, and 6 people were killed at a local secondary school, including a 39-year-old teacher and 5 students aged just 12 and 13. John Sparks has this report.
It is the last thing you'd expect in small-town Canada. A mass shooting at the local high school in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Here students run for cover after a terrifying 2-hour ordeal. Classroom doors barricaded with desks and chairs and bookshelves. 6 people were killed at the secondary school in Tumbler Ridge. The bodies of 5 were discovered in the library. Another was found in the stairwell. The majority were children. The body of the shooter was also found with self-inflicted wounds.
We understand the community has questions, and we understand they want to know the motive behind this tragic incident. We do believe the suspect acted alone, and there are currently no other outstanding suspects.
The police said the suspect was an 18-year-old school dropout called Jessie Van Rootselaar. She was a transgender woman beginning her transition 6 years ago. Before Van Rootselaar entered the high school, she killed her mother and her stepbrother at the family home.
Police had attended that residence on multiple occasions over the past several years, dealing with concerns of mental health with respect to our suspect. I can say that on different occasions, the suspect was apprehended for assessment and follow-up.
So apprehended under the Mental Health Act?
Yes.
Canadians associate mass shooting incidents with their neighbours to the south, and the country's Prime Minister appeared visibly moved.
We will get through this, we will learn from this, but right now it's a time to come together, as Canadians always do in these situations, these terrible situations, to support each other, to mourn together, and to grow together.
Members of the local police detachment were quick to the scene, arriving 2 minutes after the first call, but they didn't prevent this tragedy. They later removed a rifle and a handgun from the school. The victims haven't been identified, but the children were aged between 12 and 13 years old. A teacher was also killed. Difficult questions will follow as a small community and the nation begin to grieve. John Sparks, Sky News.
Some really sad news this morning. Former, apologies, there you are. The star of Dawson's Creek, James Vanderbeek, has died. He was only 48 years old and he's been battling bowel cancer for the last 2 years.
Yeah, and he was described as being at one of his lowest points in recent weeks and months because of the treatment and struggling with those final weeks and months. He spoke to Business Insider saying he learnt a lot and getting through the treatment and wanted to share the story he'd gone through. Of course, he was very famous for Dawson's Creek, as you said, back in 1990s, alongside Katie Holmes and others.
Yeah, it's one of those TV series that really felt such a kind of symbol of my youth, if that makes sense. It's so familiar, it's such a familiar face. And I think the thing that gets me as well is just 48.
Yeah.
I mean, as someone in the 40s, you kind of just think, my goodness me, it's just so young. 6 children as well, as co-star Busy Phillips, one of the people paying tribute, describing him as 1 in a billion, saying her heart was profoundly heartbroken for his incredible wife, Kimberly, and their 6 magical children. So really, really sad news coming there about James Vanderbeek. So we have been talking, of course, about those comments by Sir Jim Ratcliffe on the programme, and I'd be very interested to get the government's perspective on this, on, of course, the comments that he made about colonisation, and also he did have some other criticisms of the government as well that would be interesting to get into. The Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Ministry of Justice, Jake Richards, joins us now. It's great to have you on the programme. Awful lot to get to. Before we do, I did want to start off on your announcement on knife crime. It feels particularly important given the kind of double stabbing that we saw in Brent. What's the plan?
Well, look, the government has a plan to try and reduce knife crime by 50% over the next decade. We've made some progress in that. We've seen an 8% reduction in knife crime generally, a 27% reduction in homicides. But as you've just said, far too often there is still too much knife crime, in particular affecting our young people. So today we're announcing a plan which means that any child that is caught in possession of a knife will receive intensive, quick, rigorous supervision to make sure that they're diverted from criminality and that they never return to a life of crime again. We're backing that up with investment, £320 million into youth justice services over the next 3 years. And the whole point of this, to coin a phrase, is being tough on crime, tough on knife crime, but also tough on the causes of it. And if you're caught with a knife and a child is caught with a knife, then we need to deal with it quickly, and our plan today will do that.
I just wanted to get your reaction to the comments that have been made to Ed Conway from Sir Jim Ratcliffe. What do you make of what he had to say?
Well, firstly, I think that the language used around colonisation is ugly and actually quite offensive and, frankly, wrong.
Do you think it's racist?
The idea that we are, as a country, being taken over by people from abroad, I think, is not right and is wrong, and I think I understand why many people would find it offensive. It's perfectly legitimate to raise concerns about immigration. That's why this government has a commitment to bring down levels of immigration and has already gone very far in bringing down levels of immigration from the 1 million net immigration high that we had under the Conservative government. But we do need to be careful about the language we use. And the fact that Jim Ratcliffe then went on to use statistics which were completely wrong, and also the context in which he moved to Monaco to avoid paying £4 billion of tax in this country, I think he should perhaps keep some of his views to himself on this.
Do you think saying that the UK has been colonised. Do you think that's racist language?
Look, I just don't think it's very helpful, and I think it's offensive language.
OK. I want to pick up a bit on the kind of wider point that he was making as well. He was basically saying that given the serious challenges ahead, given the state of the economy, we need some courageous decision-making from politicians. So he said, if you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things that are unpopular and show some courage. And that is a criticism, I think, that many people could level at this government. Do you need to show a bit more courage to take unpopular decisions, things that haven't been focus grouped out of their lives, you know, and actually make a difference?
Well, look, I think I agree with him on this part. You know, the country for too long has been stuck for 14 years of failed Conservative government, stagnant growth.
I'm talking, can I just come in? No, I have to
Sophie,
come in. No, stop. I'm really sorry, but I can't let you kind of get away with that. You know, you've been in power for, you know, a sizable period of time. We had new growth figures out today that show 0.1% growth. I mean, come on, this is the whole point.
Sophie, but
this is literally the point of what Sir Jim is saying.
Let me avoid the partisan attacks and answer the question directly. Yes, we have to bring dramatic change to this country. That's why we were elected with a manifesto on the front page which said change. We've begun to do that with some pretty radical and sometimes unpopular policies. For example, on planning reforms. Really difficult but important planning reforms to try and build the houses that we need, which will also help in terms of getting the economy growing. On immigration, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, made a remarkable policy statement, which, yes, has upset some of my own party indeed, but it's absolutely necessary if we're going to show to the British people that we can get results in getting control of our borders and bringing down levels of illegal migration. So there's a lot more to do, and I'm not for a minute suggesting that this is job done, but I think this government has shown a capacity to be able to those difficult decisions, and we've got to take that forward.
He's talking specifically about welfare, right? So the Office for Budget Responsibility is saying that the overall bill for sickness benefit could be due to be £109 billion by the end of the decade. I think we've got some graphics as well showing the rise. This is the Office of Budget Responsibility. You know, the rise in working age adults claiming these benefits just going up and up and up. Labour's got to get that down, right? Are you going to get that down?
I believe we will. One of the big shocking...
Are you going to get it down?
Yes, because one of the big shocking statistics is that 1 in 8 young people in our country is now not in work or in employment. And that is both shocking in terms of the money and the finances for the taxpayer and your viewers, but it's also shocking morally because we do not want, especially the Labour Party, the party of work, to have young people out of work and employment and training. So we've got to get a grip of it. And Pat McFadden, who you'll no doubt be speaking to at some point, will be bringing forward a package of reforms in the future to do that.
If you kind of forgive my kind of scepticism, you tried to get this welfare stuff through before, and it was too unpopular, to use that word, with your own MPs. Now Keir Starmer is in an even more weakened position. If he tries to get this kind of stuff through, he's just going to get tapped out, isn't he?
Well, no, I don't think that's right. I think that Pat McFadden will bring forward a package, particularly focused on this really seismic issue of young people who are not in employment, not in training, not in education. We need to get a grip of that. I think we'll be bringing forward a package in which we'll do that, and I think we'll succeed in doing that.
There's been a lot of talk about Labour needing to change in the wake of the difficult week you've had, the pressures on Keir Starmer's leadership, and some people are saying that this is going to mean a move to the left. Would that be a mistake?
Well, I think on this particular issue, I don't think it's left-wing or right-wing to try and want more people to get back into work. Work is inherently a good thing, and it's part of what the Labour Party was created to do.
Would a move to the left be a mistake?
Well, look, I think that we won the last election from the centre-left of British politics. We are a centre-left party, and I think that's where we will remain.
I just want to talk to you about another story that has bubbled up over the last 24 hours, right? So lots of reports that Number 10 is preparing to replace the Cabinet Secretary of the top civil service and put in Antonia Romeo, who is the current top civil service in the Home Office. There was an extraordinary interview last night by Sir Simon MacDonald, former Permanent Secretary of the Home Foreign Office, who said he tried to warn Number 10 about this process. It needs to start from scratch. He says he's been trying to get in touch and offer testimony, but no one's called him back. And there has been, look, Antonia Romeo, dynamic, would be the first one in the job, but there was, of course, an investigation back in 2017 over bullying and misuse of expenses. What is going on here? You need to get everything right with this process.
So, look, two things. First of all, I can't comment on speculation as to who might be moving in and around the civil service. It's well above my pay grade, Sophie. But in terms of this vetting process, the Prime Minister has been very clear that something is clearly going wrong in government. when it comes to vetting processes. And so, you know, we're looking at how we can change that, make that more rigorous, and I'm sure that will include this gentleman's comments as well when we consider that.
So do you think it's important then that someone gives this guy a call, gives Sir Simon MacDonald a call?
Well, I'm sure someone will be speaking to... I genuinely don't know who this gentleman is. I'm sure he's a very senior civil servant.
He's former permanent secretary of the Foreign Office. I mean, he's quite a big deal, right?
I personally don't know him, but no doubt someone should be speaking to him about his concerns about the vetting process, because there are clearly problems in the vetting process more generally. And if someone with his experience at the top of the civil service has concerns about it too, we should be listening to them.
Should we pass his number on to you?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm the person that he should be speaking to, but someone should certainly speak to him, yes. Maybe not me.
OK, thanks very much indeed. We'll be talking about this, of course, throughout the programme. Good to have you on, as always, Jake Richards. And coming up, we're going to be talking to Deborah Haynes about the NATO meeting. An awful lot going on in the world. That is in Brussels. We'll be covering that in just a few moments' time.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report. And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Welcome back. NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels today with Ukraine and US involvement in NATO likely to be top of the agenda. It comes at a delicate moment for the alliance, which has had to grapple with increasingly tense words from the main man in the White House. And of course, it comes just ahead of the Munich Security Conference in the next couple of days. We're joined now by Marko Mihkelson, the chairman of the Estonian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. He's here in London. Marko, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Very good morning.
It's actually kind of... Today's the defence ministers' meeting in Brussels, but obviously the Munich Security Conference about to kick off. It's actually kind of crazy to me that it's been a year since the last one where J.D. Vance, made those quite high-profile comments towards Europe. Have things been worse than what was alluded to in his speech in terms of relations with the US, or not quite as bad?
It has been quite a turbulent year for all of us, actually, and not only because what we heard last year in Munich and what we expect to hear in a couple of days back in Munich, but obviously the world has gone through quite a dramatic change, and in many ways because of the new administration in Washington. But at the same time, I think European allies they realize that we have to refocus on what really matters. And I guess and I hope that during these discussions in Munich, we will specifically focus on what European nations must do. And that is to accelerate, actually, investments into defense, into real capabilities and deterrence. And that is something what we have to do as allies, to share a burden and actually to make NATO stronger. And also to make sure that our friends and allies in Washington understand that if they go and turn somehow back to us, they will commit strategic suicide, because to be left alone against China, against imperialistic Russia, they will not win.
What does Estonia spend on defence? What percentage of GDP?
In Estonia, we, from this year on, and actually for foreseeable future, for next perhaps 10 years or so, as much as needed, of course, or as long as needed, we spend at least 5% of GDP. This year, 5.4% of GDP only for defense expenditures, plus other investments into our security. But as a small nation, we have only 1.3 million on the border with Russia. We very much depend, of course, how strong NATO is, how strong transatlantic alliance is, and also what our allies are doing. And this is very important also discussion here in this country, because UK, your soldiers are the key component of NATO battalion in Estonia.
Clearly, you guys are on the border, as you said. You are much more exposed to a potential threat from Russia, and you are, as much as you can afford to, stepping up to the plate. Marco, stick with us if you don't mind. We're going to continue this discussion, but why don't we just listen to Mark Rutte quickly?
By way of introducing, say, hey, I'm really looking forward to today's meeting with the defense ministers. It will be very much about the implementation of what we decided in The Hague, ramping up Canada and Europe when it comes to defense spending, across the alliance, making sure that the defense industrial base is producing the output we need to be able to deter and defend ourselves. And obviously Ukraine, where you just heard the good news from John Healey, the UK Defence Secretary, Secretary of Defence, announcing £500 million in air defence, both bilateral and Pearl for Ukraine. And this is really important because Ukraine, as you know, they are really staunch, they are fighting back, but they are also still hit with missiles, etc., on their civilian infrastructure and innocent civilians. So this is important. But what you see overall is a picture of Canada and Europe stepping up, spending billions more on defense, ramping up the defense industrial base, keeping Ukraine strong. So I think this is very important. We will take stock today and then chart out the course towards our summit in The Hague. So I take a few questions because we will see each other later today at the press conference. Sir.
Secretary General, there's Arctic Sentry, Baltic Sentry, Eastern Sentry, Steadfast Dart. Norway is doing a cold response. Has there ever been so many NATO exercises planned in such a precise period of time as we're seeing right now?
Well, thank you for that question, because I'm not sure it is more than, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago, but it clearly shows you that the threat is there. The long-term Russian threat is there. And we should not be naive, by the way, about China. And when it comes to the Arctic, it is not only Russia. It is also China. We know that sea lanes are opening up, so we have to defend the Arctic and bring together all these various initiatives. And then charting a way ahead, making sure that we identify the gaps which are there, and then making sure that we can fill the gaps, and taking into account all the latest technologies through our Allied Command transformation. There's exactly evidence that NATO as a whole, the US, Canada, the European allies, are working hand in hand together to make sure that we defend every inch of NATO territory. Yes, sir.
You said yesterday that the US administration is fully aware of the situation in Ukraine.
Yes.
So aren't you a bit frustrated by the lack of pressure this administration is putting on?
I think that is not fair. Of course, you can ask me any question, but I think the statement within the question is not fair. The US is putting every pressure on Russia, as the Europeans are doing, through the sanction packages. Look what has been happening with Lukoil and Rosneft and all the other stuff the US is doing. The US is still delivering crucial air defense and other lethal weapons into Ukraine through this Pearl program, so paid for by Canadian, European allies and partners. And the US is leading the peace effort. And there is only one country, the most powerful nation on earth, the US, which can do that under the leadership of President Trump.
Looks like we lost Mark Rutte. We might have him back in just a moment. We do have him back. Let's just go back.
In Davos, but also what we discussed within Europe with our partners in Canada, our allies in Canada and the United States, is that we have to defend the Arctic. This is Greenland, but also the whole Arctic. And the good news, I think, yesterday is with the launch of Arctic Sentry that we will now bring together all the assets which we have currently available in the Arctic, getting the whole picture, getting NORAD involved, US NORSCOM involved, EUCOM involved, and all the European allies together to make sure that we defend the Arctic against, as I said, the opening up of sea lanes, Russia increasingly active there, but also China.
Are you not concerned, Secretary General, that this renewed focus on the Arctic could pull focus somewhat from NATO's eastern flank?
No, NATO is so strong that we can do both, and we have to basically have a 360-degree approach to any threat against NATO territory. And Eastern Sentry, making sure that our eastern flank is secure and strong, and we have seen the drone incursions in Poland early September. We have seen what happened in Estonia a couple of weeks later in September with the MiG from Russia into Estonian airspace. So we have to make sure that we defend every inch of Allied territory. So Eastern Sentry is important, Baltic Sentry, making sure that we protect the undersea sea cables and critical infrastructure, but of course also the Arctic, and this is Greenland, but also the rest of the Arctic, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark through Greenland, Iceland, Canada and the US. Focusing, of course, primarily on the area where our Supreme Allied Commander is working with.
Mark Rutte there, the head of NATO, will monitor that. Deborah Haynes is there for us, and we'll be speaking to Deborah in just a moment. Still with me here is Marko Mihkelson, the chairman of the Estonian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. Marko, is it right for Mark Rutte to strike an optimistic or constructive tone about the outlook of NATO, or is he a little bit blinded by the challenges ahead?
This is Mark Rutte at his best. You know, he's doing his job as NATO's Secretary General just to really bring us together, because what we, as I said, what we have to focus on to make sure that we will not delay our investments into defense, because what we see, Russia hasn't changed their strategic objectives. They want to destroy sovereignty of Ukraine, and they eventually want to destroy NATO. Because just a few days ago, Lavrov said that, that ultimatum what Russia delivered to NATO in December 21 is still there. So it's what is important is to, from our side, to show unity, resolve, readiness to really invest quickly into the capabilities and deterrence. And also, what is critically important, not to be deceived by those so-called peace negotiations, because unfortunately, what we have seen, aggressor state Russia hasn't been at all interested to halt hostilities and war against Ukraine.
Just finally, I mean, going back to where we were earlier, you spend over 5% of your GDP, yes. Obviously a much smaller country on defence. Should we be spending more here on the UK? If we're ticking up from 2.3 to 2.4, is that enough of an increase?
Absolutely. And I think this is what was the substance of our meetings yesterday at Parliament as well here, that perhaps we have to understand 2035, what was agreed up in The Hague. And that was a good decision that the allies go up with defence expenditures. But 10 years from now, we're talking here about how big changes are there within a month or two or 1 year, what we have seen since last Munich. So what is our message to our allies is that we have to ramp up. We have to make sure that those goals are brought closer, at least to 2030, rather than 35.
Marco, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. Thanks for sticking around as well during those comments from Mark Rutte. We are going to have a quick look at the weather now.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
It'll turn drier, brighter and colder into the weekend, but otherwise the potentially disruptive wet weather will continue. Northeastern parts will see a scattering of blustery, wintry showers this morning, while Northern Ireland, northern and central parts of Ireland and southwestern Britain can expect more general rain. The southwest of Ireland will be showery. Northern parts and later, but it'll stay largely overcast elsewhere. Expect prolonged rain from northern Irish counties through to central southern England and showers elsewhere, wintry in the north. It'll be cold generally with quite a raw wind.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Coming up, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been in the White House meeting with President Trump. We're going to be discussing what was on the agenda.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Bangkok.
These slums, once gripped by fear and death.
There is far less bloodshed now, but it hasn't gone away.
Who's asking you to kill?
The police will give me the orders, and after I kill the target, I throw the gun away.
We try our best to uncover and unpick a fast-changing and deeply complex region.
These large waterways provided an excellent source of body disposal.
This is the Buriganga River, where victims who'd allegedly been shot dead were dumped.
Sheikh Hasina, how confident are you that she will stand trial?
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that.
We're going to take you to the very heart of a criminal network, going undercover inside Southeast Asia's scam centres for the very first time.
We won't have any problems with police, it's okay. Just seen Imran Khan leave, and as we understand it, he's just been shot in the leg.
They have decided that the only way they'll allow elections is if I am inside jail or killed.
Sky News get the full story first.
Chinese vessels start encircling the boat we're on, blocking its path.
The Chinese are now deploying water cannons, firing it directly towards our boat. We've discovered doctors across Delhi dishing out pills like this, claiming they will provide a lifelong cure for homosexuality.
Rohingya people fleeing an escalating civil war.
The situation here in Cox's is desperate. An already insecure place does feel a lot more precarious.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to. Being a Sky News presenter. Hello and welcome, Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has met President Donald Trump at the White House. They'll be talking, of course, about the situation in Gaza, but also about Iran.
After their talks, President Trump said no definitive agreement had been reached on how to move forward, but insisted negotiations with Iran over its nuclear programme would continue in an effort to secure a deal. Well, let's bring in now our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons. Adam, great to have you with us. Just set the scene for not only what's come out of this meeting in the White House, but how it came about, because it was suddenly rushed up the agenda.
Yeah, it was expected that Prime Minister Netanyahu would be going over to the States next week to coincide with a big meeting of an organisation that Americans who support Israel. Then it came forward, and now I think you can read into that certain nervousness in Israel about Iran and its intentions, and also about America's intentions. Now, if you unpick this, ultimately, right now, America seems to have ruled out strikes in order to support protesters. Donald Trump hasn't said that, J.D. Vance has. America seems to be much, much more concerned about nuclear enrichment than is Israel. Israel's concerned is largely around Iran building up its stockpile of ballistic missiles. And so Benjamin Netanyahu came out to Washington, the 6th time he's come to Washington since Donald Trump returned to the White House, and had this meeting, I suspect, effectively to say, look, concentrate on missiles, don't obsess about nuclear enrichment, and do not sell yourself short. Officials here have told me they are worried that the Americans simply won't strike a tough enough bargain and that will give Iran concessions that worry Israel. So there's a lot of fear here in the Israeli political establishment that effectively from their position, Iran will strike a good deal, Iran will build up its missiles, and that it will then be in a place to renew its attacks on Israel. So I suspect another thing that Benjamin Netanyahu will have said is, if you just do nuclear enrichment, if this happens, then if we are in a position where we have to strike first, are you going to have our back? So interesting, there was no press conference afterwards. The statements they put out were pretty sparse. There wasn't even a big, a sound and light show for Benjamin Netanyahu when he arrived. He came in through the sort of workers' entrance gate at the side of the White House. So quite muted in terms of the pomp and ceremony, and I think probably a little more tense and less of a bromance than we normally get from these two.
Adam, what is the latest on the ground in Iran? What stage are we at with the protests and the clampdown?
So Iran has just held its big memorial celebrations. Remember, the Ayatollah has been in place now for 47 years. So the nation feels that it is clearly, look, Iran is in a weak position. The regime is weakened, not just by these protests, but by the economic problems that led to them. But they are taking a tough line in these negotiations by common consent. The Iranian negotiation team is tough, and they are making it clear that they don't want to negotiate around ballistic missiles. They feel that that is an impingement on their sovereign rights. It's clear that they are prepared to give some way on enrichment, but not that much. So the Iranians feel that they can strike a tough deal, and they have also put forward a pretty belligerent response in terms of saying that if there is an attack on them, then they will return fire not just at Tel Aviv in Israel, but also at American military sites across the region. They are clearly threatening to spark a regional war rather than just a sort of trade of missiles with Israel. And I think there are plenty in the American administration who think the last thing they want to take responsibility for is attacks on American servicemen overseas. I think that, Wilf, is one of the reasons you're seeing J.D. Vance taking this position of really saying regime change in Iran is a matter for the Iranian people. A few weeks ago, I think the White House was suggesting that they might want a prompt regime change. That, for the moment, has gone away.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Anne Parsons there in Jerusalem.
Now, Bangladesh is a country which has seen years of political upheaval, and today there is a parliamentary election. It's the first since the 2024 uprising, which ended in the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina being exiled.
It's been seen as a critical test for the country's democratic system after years of turmoil. Well, our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch joins us now to set this up for us. Cordelia, how big a test is this?
It's a huge test. This is the most crucial election in Bangladesh that we have seen for more than a decade.
As you say, it comes after this huge student movement, this Gen Z momentum that led to the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, the former Prime Minister who ruled the country for 2 decades and who is now in self-imposed exile in India. Now, during a brutal crackdown, 1,400 people were killed, according to the UN, and she has been convicted and sentenced to death for ordering that brutal crackdown. Now, when it comes to this election, there is genuine optimism in the air in Bangladesh that this might be the first time for a long time that there is no predictable outcome and that it will be a free and fair election. It must be said, one party, Sheikh Hasina's party, the Awami League, has been banned. This by a administration who has said these will be free and fair elections. So it casts some shadows over that claim. What we are seeing is kind of 2 key frontrunners at the moment. Certainly, the core frontrunner is the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. That is the largest. It is being run by Tariq Rahman, a man who's been in self-imposed exile himself in London since 2008. He is the son of former Prime Minister Zia as well. So the firm favourite currently, but there's a lot of unpredictability alongside that. We also have the party Jamaat Islami as well. They want to run the country under Islamic law. Some of the students have joined with them, shown some support, in which some say that might limit some of their demands, some of their desires. The big core test is, will the youth have a vote or not? Because they haven't kind of got one core party to coalesce around. So lots to play for and lots of optimism that people will get their voices heard this time round.
Cordy, great stuff. Thanks so much. Looking forward to discussing that further next hour as well.
Now, 3 months ago, our North of England correspondent Greg Mylan sat down with Ed Rumley. Now, she was dying, and Ed set out the case for why she believed that she should be allowed to die on her own terms. So this was at the peak of the debate around the assisted dying bill in Parliament.
Well, 6 weeks after that interview, Ed died. Now, Greg has been back to speak to her son, who was with her at the end.
It was 3 months ago that Ed sat in her favourite armchair and talked about her impending death, to call for what she wouldn't have, the right to have an assisted death.
I feel that I don't want other people to restrict my choice, and I'm perfectly capable of deciding for me.
49 days later, Ed died. Her son Stephen was with her. It was a harrowing and difficult journey, and sitting in that same armchair, he says it was exactly what she dreaded.
She wouldn't have chose that end, and she very much researched it, very intelligent woman, and she knew exactly what was going to happen to her. Mum lived her life with dignity. The control was taken away from her. The dignity was removed. It actually took away her humanity and took away her options, and she had to go through the process that they told her that she had to go through. She didn't have any other choices open to her.
Ed had hoped the assisted dying bill would mean others did have those choices, but its future is now uncertain. Supporters say opponents in the House of Lords are trying to kill it. Those opponents say it needs scrutiny to protect vulnerable people. Stephen lives in New Zealand, which does have an assisted dying law. At the time of his mum's death, an elderly friend back home took that choice.
As a New Zealand citizen, I would never have to go through what Mum went through, and whether I chose that option or not, it's still an option that is fully open and available to me. And just knowing that, you know, whether you use those options or not, at least you have that, exactly that. You've got options.
Ed had wanted to die in her own living room. in that favourite armchair with a cup of tea by her side.
I feel disappointed for her that as a person who had fought for justice all her life, I felt the system let her down a little bit at the end. I don't think she had the justice that she deserved. Mum was so frustrated with the system. I don't think Mum was a person who was angry much. She would see things for how they were and try and change them, you know? How can I make this better, if not for me, but for other people? And that's how Mum lived her life.
Greg Milam, Sky News.
It's desperately sad. If you've been affected by that story, you can contact the Samaritans at any time. The number is 116 123 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org.
Now, just enough time to dwell on this story today. Should we move the school holidays? This is a suggestion that's come from the head of Ofsted, which oversees exams. And one of the factors around this suggestion is that it's too hot to take exams in May, sometimes June, and it affects kids' concentration.
Yeah, he says that just at the time you're asking kids to sit down and take an exam. The other point that he makes as well, that is actually backed up by research, is that the longer school holiday, which is 6 weeks in most state schools over the summer, he says it's bizarre and it's all just about, going out in the harvesting fields in times of old. But I think the worry is that kids just forget everything that they've learned over 6 weeks. Not everything.
It says 53% of parents who are surveyed would back plans to reduce the school summer holiday. Bit harsh on the kids, though.
Yeah, well, you still get the holiday, you just get longer half terms.
It's best when it's at summertime. We're out of time. We'll be right back.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond. You're like, what?
An historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Sophy and Wilf, good morning from me as well. Busy morning ahead.
The Prime Minister tells billionaire Jim Ratcliffe to apologise for his comments on immigrants using the benefit system. Nigel Farage says Labour are ignoring the issue.
Sean Dyche is out at Nottingham Forest after just 114 days, the third coach to leave the Premier League club this season.
Police in Canada say the suspect behind a deadly school shooting was an 18-year-old school dropout and transgender woman with a history of mental health problems, but no word yet on any motive.
We'll be talking as well about how hackers are breaking into office buildings and holding businesses to ransom.
And we'll speak to the victim of Ian Paterson, the rogue breast cancer surgeon jailed for performing unnecessary surgeries on his patients.
We just wanted to bring you the very latest breaking news that we're just getting in now. It's about the Olympics, because the Ukrainian skeleton racer who wore a helmet featuring athletes who have died during the war in Ukraine has been disqualified. He's been chucked out of the Games. So this is Vladislav Heraskovich. He was the nation's flag bearer at the opening ceremony last week, and he's been training in that helmet you can see on the screens now on Monday, saying some of the people pictured were his friends. He had been visited by the International Olympic Committee official who warned him he's in breach of the Games rules around political statements, but he said it was too important, he wanted to do it anyway.
Yeah, the rules obviously, as Sophie says, don't allow political statements. In the last 24 hours, he's been asked about this whilst he was waiting for the IOC's decision, and he said, I believe we all have the right to wear these types of statements. I believe the IOC doesn't have enough black armbands to honour all of the athletes, saying that any other attempts to kind of honour them doesn't do it justice, and saying that they deserved to have a place in the Games, these individuals. I mean, I think, you know, you have to say rules are rules, but is this a sort of unnecessarily sort of small fry one relative to what's being said here?
And I think the thing that you can definitely agree on is that this man, Heraskovich, has made his point very, very strongly. You know, on Instagram, he previously said he felt the Olympics Committee is betraying the athletes who are part of the Olympic movement, not allowing them to be honoured on the sports arena, where these athletes will never be able to step again.
So that's just broken in the last few minutes that he has been removed from the Olympics. Now, our other top story. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, one of the richest men in the UK and part owner of Manchester United, owner of Ineos, has told Sky News that he thinks the UK has been colonised by immigrants and it's costing too much money. The Prime Minister demanded an apology, saying his comments were offensive and wrong. And the Manchester United Supporters Trust has also voiced concerns.
Now, he made these comments as part of a very wide-ranging and frank interview with Sky's Ed Conway. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, in that interview, also called for courage from politicians to make difficult but necessary decisions on issues like the rising welfare bill. He said we need somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out. Let's have a listen to Sir Jim talking to Ed.
If you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things which are unpopular and show some courage.
And has this government done that?
No, I think they I don't know whether it's just the apparatus that hasn't allowed Keir to do it, or he's maybe too nice. He's a nice. I mean, I know Keir. He's a nice man. I like him, but. It's a tough job, and I think you have to do some difficult things with the UK to get it back on track, because at the moment I don't think the economy is in a good. You can't afford. You can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause. It'll cause. Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. No, it's 70 million. That's 12 million people.
You met recently with Nigel Farage, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in. But, I think it needs somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out, would be my view.
Well, Keir Starmer's responded to it. We also got a response this morning from the Justice Minister, Jake Richards, who said the Man U co-owner should keep his views to himself.
Yeah, I think that the language used around colonisation is ugly and actually quite offensive and frankly wrong.
Do you think it's racist?
The idea that we are, as a country, being taken over by people from abroad, I think is not right and is wrong, and I think I understand why many people would find it offensive. It's perfectly legitimate to raise concerns about immigration. That's why this government has a commitment to bring down levels of immigration and has already gone very far in bringing down levels of immigration from the 1 million net immigration high that we had under the Conservative government. But we do need to be careful about the language we use. And the fact that Jim Ratcliffe then went on to use statistics which were completely wrong, and also the context in which he moved to Monaco to avoid paying £4 billion of tax in this country, I think he should perhaps keep some of his views to himself on this.
Do you think saying that the UK has been colonised, do you think that's racist language?
Look, I just don't think it's very helpful, and I think it's offensive language.
Mari's here to discuss it a bit further with us. Clearly, the colonisation word was unnecessary and unacceptable, and he got some of the statistics wrong as well.
Yeah, he did. So I think it's important to correct the record in terms of what he said and actually the reality of the kind of makeup of the UK's population. So he had said that immigration had increased the population from 58 million to 70 million between 2020 and 2026. Now, the figures that we actually have are from the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, and actually from 2020 to 2024, which is the data that we do have, it went from 67 million to 70 million, so actually only 3 million rather than the 12 that was suggested. And the figure that perhaps he'd gotten confused with was the population was 58.9 million back in the year 2000, so 25 years ago. So it's important just to kind of establish that in terms of some of those figures not being accurate. But I think what's really interesting about what Jim Ratcliffe has said is I think it points to a changing of what people have started to feel is perhaps more mainstream and more acceptable to say. And it is, to an extent, a bit of a mirroring of, you have this kind of often on social media, this online belief or kind of theory called the Great Replacement. And it is mirroring some of the kind of rhetoric around the idea of Europeans being replaced as a population by immigrants, by brown people. And I think what's interesting is that theory has become a more mainstream ideology, especially on social media, and it is now being mirrored by people like Jim Ratcliffe, who have started to say these kinds of things. And as much as people might want to be shocked, I mean, Keir Starmer did a tweet where he said it was offensive and wrong. Britain is a proud, tolerant and diverse country. Jim Ratcliffe should apologise. But on the other hand, you have Nigel Farage, who has, rather than condemning it or calling it out as anything that's wrong, he said Britain has undergone unprecedented mass immigration that has changed the character of many areas in our country. Labour may try to ignore that, but reform won't, and really indicating that actually perhaps he agrees and perhaps he's got a point.
I mean, the other thing to say as well is I do think it's important to make the point that he's a co-owner of a football club, and for many people, these football teams are a great way of showing diverse races, backgrounds, nations coming together and playing as a team. And there'll be a lot of black, brown, white players in Manchester United who also feel offended by those comments. I did just want to ask, while we've got you as well, Mari, though, about his kind of wider point about political courage. Yeah. Because here, I think that some people, or a lot of people, might actually think he does have a point about, politicians being prepared to be unpopular to make decisions that they think are right or they know are right in the long-term future of the country.
Absolutely. And I think He is right, and he touches on a nerve that is there is an appetite for politicians that are willing to do things that might not be vote winners, but that could really kind of get the UK, especially the UK economy, out of the kind of hole that we've found ourselves in. You were talking about the GDP figures earlier this morning. Disappointing once again. We are not getting the growth that we were promised by Labour. And perhaps Wes Streeting saying he was wrong, that they didn't have a growth strategy. Maybe he wasn't so wrong after all. I think the difficulty is that actually Jim Ratcliffe, he has a point that actually there is a point where people in this country feel that there isn't enough courage in politics, and to an extent that is why we are seeing Reform and Nigel Farage being so popular, and to an extent the Greens as well, because their ideas are more radical, more kind of ripping the plaster off, getting on with it, ripping up rules necessarily, and just doing what needs to be done. And people want to hear that kind of messaging. Now, people might say it's completely unrealistic once you actually get into government and have to deal with the civil service, but nonetheless, people like that kind of messaging. And I think the difficulty is we had a huge amount of that messaging from Labour in the election campaign around making tough decisions and doing what was right rather than what was easy. And in power, that hasn't really materialised into actually following through with a lot of those difficult decisions.
And forget exactly what the policies are. They pledged growth as their top agenda item. You see what policies would be popular? Growth. People's wages going up. And, you know, the data this morning, 0.1% for the fourth quarter. It's 2 quarters in a row where GDP per capita has declined. So,
if I honestly, in the space of this 1 week, how many times the government line, whether it's the Treasury or Number 10, whoever it is, has said the words, we are creating the conditions for growth, right? They keep talking about creating the conditions for growth rather than creating the growth. And that I've heard so many times this week from government already, and that is a concern.
We could just ban the word growth from all politicians talking about it.
They're just going to deliver it.
Yeah.
They can say it when they delivered it.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's it.
Look at the growth I've created.
Fine.
Say that as much as you like if it's true.
Yeah, look at the growth I am going to create by my lovely conditions. Not OK. Mari, thank you very much.
Now, some people who have a bit of time on their hands.
Sean Dyche, out at Nottingham Forest.
And Thomas Frank, out at Tottenham Hotspur. 2 high-profile firings of Premier League managers on the same day. Yesterday, Thomas Frank was in the morning, just after the show finished, and Sean Dyche late yesterday. The really crazy thing about this is both teams, Nottingham Forest and Tottenham, slide down the table towards the relegation zone. So even though they've only had short tenures, you can sort of understand a bit of the thinking from the owners. But Nottingham Forest have now fired 3 managers this season. Unbelievable.
I've got an idea for Sean Dyche.
What's that?
He should come manage Sheffield Wednesday.
Why didn't you get him and Thomas Frank?
I think they could do a double act.
The only problem you have with that, aren't you a bit short on cash at the moment, Sheffield Wednesday?
Oh, you're with a great manager, I'm sure there's
but their
no
wages are quite high.
Yeah.
But also, didn't they just get fired from a team to avoid facing relegation? If they came to Sheffield Wednesday...
Look,
would they avoid it?
There are certain hurdles in the way of my great plan. I acknowledge and admit this.
Well, they're available.
Yeah, there you go.
What about just Sean Dyche goes to Spurs, Thomas Frank goes to Nottingham Forest?
Do a little job swap.
Yeah,
you know what? Could work out, right?
I think also, when you're changing the leadership this much, the football pitch leadership, I think the owners have to start taking a bit of responsibility, don't they?
I think that's completely right, to be honest. Let's be honest.
Of course, not the end of the world. I think Tottenham aren't doing that well.
No, also an Arsenal fan. But anyway, moving on from that, because there is one story that we did want to bring you a bit of an update about. We've been covering it a lot this week because we know more now about the suspect behind the deadly school shooting in Canada. Police say 18-year-old Jesse Van Rootselaar is a suspect, a school dropout, a transgender woman, someone who was born a biological man.
The suspect's mother and stepbrother were also found dead at a nearby home, alongside the 6 people that were killed at the local secondary school, including a 39-year-old teacher and 5 students aged just 12 and 13. John Sparks has more.
It is the last thing you'd expect in small-town Canada. A mass shooting at the local high school in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Here students run for cover after a terrifying 2-hour ordeal. Classroom doors barricaded with desks and chairs and bookshelves. 6 people were killed at the secondary school in Tumbler Ridge. The bodies of 5 were discovered in the library. Another was found in the stairwell. The majority were children. The body of the shooter was also found with self-inflicted wounds.
We understand the community has questions, and we understand they want to know the motive behind this tragic incident. We do believe the suspect acted alone, and there are currently no other outstanding suspects.
The police said the suspect was an 18-year-old school dropout called Jessie Van Rootselaar. She was a transgender woman beginning her transition 6 years ago. Before Van Rootselaar entered the high school, she killed her mother and her stepbrother at the family home.
Police had attended that residence on multiple occasions over the past several years, dealing with concerns of mental health with respect to our suspect. I can say that on different occasions, the suspect was apprehended for assessment and follow-up.
So apprehended under the Mental Health Act?
Yes.
Canadians associate mass shooting incidents with their neighbours to the south, and the country's Prime Minister appeared visibly moved.
We will get through this, we will learn from this, but right now it's a time to come together, as Canadians always do, in these situations, these terrible situations, to support each other, to mourn together, and to grow together.
Members of the local police detachment were quick to the scene, arriving 2 minutes after the first call, but they didn't prevent this tragedy. They later removed a rifle and a handgun from the school. The victims haven't been identified, but the children were aged between 12 and 13 years old. A teacher was also killed. Difficult questions will follow as a small community and the nation begin to grieve. John Sparks, Sky News.
Awful story from Canada yesterday. Now, there have been some pretty big cyber attacks recently. Jaguar Land Rover, you might remember, Marks & Spencer have also been targeted by hackers, and they each took big financial hits because of it.
Yeah, it's not just the big companies, it should be said, though, who are at risk, because lots of cyber criminals after, a quick buck, and they've realised a great way of getting that is hacking into office buildings, any office building, really, including CCTV, sensors, even the main doors sometimes as well.
Joining us now is Sanjaya Ranasinghe, Vice President for Research and Development at WiredScore. It's a company which focuses on making the world's buildings smarter and better connected. Sanjay, great to have you with us. So this is really, we're talking about cyber attacks, but also physical buildings.
Yes.
And there was an example a year or so ago in California that you can retell for us that kind of brings this to light, where people can kind of weaponise the physical building.
Yeah, so the challenge that the industry faces is that more and more of the devices in buildings, so things that control door access, for example, or the heating or the ventilation, are now connected to the internet. So that means that if you can hack into those devices, as per any other hack, you suddenly can get control over the building. And the incident you talked around in California was one where the building was got hacked. The hackers took control of the door access control and the fire alarms, actually, and set off a fake fire alarm. So the alarm started going, everyone started to leave the building when they realised it wasn't a test, and they got to the doors and they couldn't get out.
Wow.
And then everything just stopped, though. The fire alarm stopped, the doors just opened again, everything went back to normal operation, just a click of the fingers. But it was just more like a proof of concept of what's happened.
So that wasn't people trying to nick money or anything, that was literally almost like a kind of show of power.
In a way, yes, but I think what we have also seen is that this is a really active way of getting ransom payments, because what you're doing is a digital attack on a building, which has then physical, operational consequences, and people want to get buildings back up and running as quickly as possible, which means paying ransoms.
And are big corporations paying those ransoms and trying to keep, if they've been threatened or hacked, trying to keep that on the down low, and it sort of serves them, they might think in the short term wrongly, serves them better to pay up or not? I guess I'm saying there are lots that we don't know about. We mentioned two that we've heard about? Are there lots that we haven't heard about?
The short answer is yes, but just to put it into context, what we're talking about is these large central London office buildings with multiple occupiers, multiple companies in there, and it's the landlords and the operating companies that see these threats. So something suddenly comes in that takes out all of the heating and ventilation for the building, so it's not... And that's focused on, because there might be, very high-profile occupiers, companies working in those buildings, and therefore the risk is high. The owners and operators of those buildings don't want to show to those high-profile companies that their building's at risk, and that's a threat. So paying of those ransoms has become something that we're hearing is happening more and more often under the radar.
Can I touch about AI? Is it changing the picture for these kind of hacks?
Yeah, the challenge that AI brings to the industry, actually any industry that's facing cyber threats, is the lowering of the barrier to entry to an attack, because you can basically ask the AI what to do, and at the scale at which you can deploy it.
So the risk is people using AI saying, how do I hack into this building, and AI telling them.
Yeah.
Is that what is happening? So, AI would actually tell you how to do that?
Yeah, obviously the companies involved are trying to put defences in place to stop this happening, but yeah, you see more and more reports of, you will have that AI assistant as you do in day-to-day life, and if you're nefarious, you can get nefarious assistance.
Yeah.
What's the way to protect against it?
So it's really simple. It's the same measures that companies and corporations are doing for their IT equipment, their laptops and their mobile phones to make sure they're safe, but applying that to what we call operational technology. So the technology that's behind the scenes that makes a building run. So that could be the lighting, it could be the heating, it could be the CCTV systems, making sure that those systems, now they're connected to the internet, are treated with the same level of security as the rest of the IT stock in a company.
I know this is not your area of expertise, but I just think, for a lot of people watching, we don't run buildings or control doors or whatever, but what a lot of us are really aware of is scams, right? And people being scammed. And I've been reading an awful lot recently about how AI is going to really make these scams much more effective, whether it's like replicating people's voices on the phone to try and get you to transfer money or whatever it might be. Is that something that you're kind of aware of happening?
Yeah, and I think the key message to bring across is that even at buildings, it's the same vulnerabilities that attackers are trying to get at. So it is still phishing emails. It is still the human being in the loop and being the vulnerability itself. So all of those same methods of attack that we face in our day-to-day life are the attacks that are targeting buildings as well.
Sanjay, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting. There's a security gate over there that now I think I know what's happened. It's got a mind of its own, that gate. Yeah, it's caused me great trouble.
Will's talking about our sort of this glass gate into our office.
It's lethal.
I think it was a couple of weeks ago that he got a whole coffee.
Whole coffee.
This nice white shirt.
Down about an hour before the show. Saved the day, though. Fairy liquid. Did you know you could wash coffee out with fairy liquid and a hairdryer, turn it around in 40 minutes?
That is a great tip.
No one noticed it?
Amazing. There you go.
But that gate, if it hasn't been hacked, we should get it hacked.
Exactly.
Honestly. Or don't actually do that, anyone.
Yeah, please don't do that. Why are we even talking about this on air? This is a security risk, probably. Anyway, right. On to the rest of the day's news before we get into more trouble.
There's a parliamentary election in Bangladesh today, the first since the 2024 uprising, which ended in former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's exile.
Now, it's a big, big test for the country's democratic system after, frankly, years of political turmoil. And our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch, joins us now. Cordelia, what are we expecting today?
Well, this is a crucial election, perhaps the most crucial in more than a decade. There is great hope that it will put Bangladesh on a more democratic path, and it follows a very consequential crackdown, student protests led by the Gen Z movement back in 2024 that led to the ouster of the former leader of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, who grew increasingly authoritarian. Now, she is in self-imposed exile in India, and it means that there is a path now available, that nothing is as predictable as it has been in previous elections. And it's also a test of the strength, the power, the potential of the youth vote. Interestingly, though, it is established parties that are really the front runners, it would seem, at this moment. You've got on one side the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Now, that is led by Tariq Rahman, who's been in self-imposed exile in London, only returning after 17 years. It's the largest party. It's the one most people expect to win, but
You know, there could easily be some surprises. You also have Jamaat Islami. They want to run the country through Islamic law. Now, some of the youth vote have actually got behind that party, although there's been some internal splits amongst young voters. And it must be said, the reason the youth vote is so critical, around 45% of those voting are aged between 18 and 33 years old. So a lot of people waiting to see what kind of weight and shape they might bring to this particular election. But I think, you know, Sheikh Hasina, there was a long shadow cast over the country during her 15 years of rule. And so there's great hope that this time people feel like their vote is going to count.
Cordy, I had a follow-up question, which is the extent to which this election or the result of it could make any difference at all to the conviction and sentence that was passed down to Tulip Siddiq, the Labour MP. I mean, I know the judiciary and politics, I imagine there is meant to be separate, but I think it's fair to say a lot of this was somewhat politicised as well.
Yeah, that's right. And we've seen, Wilf, haven't we, two significant sentences handed down to Tulip Siddiq. That's in relation to allegations of corruption against her, related to a land deal, effectively, in Dhaka, Bangladesh's capital. I think it's difficult to say at this stage. I think what is clear is that their judiciary, their courts, have long been accused of corruption. She certainly has alleged that that was effectively political persecution, that she was being pursued because of the relationship with, of course, her aunt, Sheikh Hasina, and she has always maintained her innocence. They are also voting the country today on wide-sweeping constitutional reforms, because for a very long time in Bangladesh there has been concerns about the judiciary, about the rule of law, about the role of the military as well. Those student protests back in 2024 led to the deaths, according to the UN, of 1,400 student protesters, and some of those cases are still going through the court. So it will be interesting to see what kind of impact the next party that is chosen will have on those particular cases. But this is for the first time for a very long time that there's kind of pause for thought, a chance to reshape the course of the country after many years of authoritarian rule.
Cordy, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Coming up, we're going to be talking about a man known as the butcher surgeon, someone who carried out unnecessary breast removals on many women. We'll be talking to one of his victims up next.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Hello again. Holiday bosses asking the Chancellor to backtrack on her plans to introduce what they're calling a holiday tax. So they say it's going to drain money away from local businesses. What is a holiday tax? What's going on? Is it really a holiday tax? We can talk to Molly Mullane, who hopefully can explain more what's going on.
So it's kind of like a visitor's tax, actually. A bit of it can be a tourist, but it can be you or I sort of going to another English city. This is a load, about 200 of big UK accommodation firms. So Butlins, Hilton Travel Lodge.
New one.
That's a new one you hadn't heard of. Basically saying, in their words, writing to the Chancellor, holidays are for relaxing, not taxing. So they're rallying against, in England, this tourist or visitors tax. Places like Scotland is already coming in the summer and Wales next year. So, and actually, if you go to like Manchester at the moment, you can pay £1 a night for some hotel rooms, but it's very much up to the kind of local business as to whether they do it or not. So the government have got this consultation going on at the moment, and it's basically going to be powers for mayors to decide whether they want to introduce it. So a couple of the Labour mayors have already been sort of supportive of it in London and Liverpool, Steve Rotherham, and West of England mayor as well, all Labour mayors. But these firms writing to the Chancellor warning that it's going to hit families, put jobs at risk and drain money from communities. So they want them to scrap it. But they're looking at potentially maybe £2 a night. So their argument is, look, if you go, say, for Cornwall for a 2-week holiday in the summer, a family of 4, you could be paying £100 more or something in tax, adding to the cost of a holiday. If you've been to a European city, you would have paid it for ages, right? There's lots of places like Paris, Barcelona, and as I say, Scotland and Wales are going to introduce it. But hospitality firms are clearly a little bit worried about it.
I think the interesting nuance here is obviously this was introduced by the Chancellor to allow local mayors to decide to do it or not.
Yeah.
And yet the hospitality organisations are targeting it back to the Chancellor as opposed to their local mayors to say, don't use this option here.
Yeah.
I think the broader point is that hospitality is just really feeling the pinch.
Yeah.
And there was a very, we often talk about the farmers have a very effective lobby because they have tractors. The pubs have an effective lobby because we all love pubs.
Yeah.
They're having a bit of a U-turn, but the rest of the hospitality sector is still really struggling and they haven't had the same little U-turns.
Well, we saw pubs are effective in sort of campaigning against the business rate backlash, and now I guess other hospitality firms are going to be saying, look, what about us? But, you know, you've got, wherever you look, there's kind of discrepancies, aren't there? And because if it's not pubs, then you've got cafes moaning that they're not getting the same treatment. So you're going to have kind of discrepancies across the kind of sector. And yeah, as you say, they could quite effectively sort of lobby the local mayors because ultimately it's going to be for them to decide, but instead they're putting it back at the government's sort of door.
Well, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Now, in 2003, Deborah Douglas was diagnosed with breast cancer by Ian Paterson, who's a surgeon based in the Midlands. What she didn't know then was the medical atrocities he would go on to commit.
Over 7 years, Deborah placed her trust in Paterson, undergoing a mastectomy, reconstructive surgery and extensive chemotherapy under his care, only to discover that her cancer diagnosis had been exaggerated and her treatment was totally unnecessary.
She wasn't alone, and in 2017, the rogue surgeon was then sentenced to 20 years in prison for wounding patients after performing needless operations. And we can talk now to Deborah. She's written a book called The Cost of Trust, The Butcher Surgeon and the Scandal That Shamed British Medicine. Just to say, first of all, you know, we really appreciate you talking to us. I imagine that this is a deeply traumatic episode in your life to have to go through. We're here to kind of hold your hand through the interview. How did you first realise that something was wrong?
I first realised after he got suspended, which was in 2011,
At that point, all I knew was he's been suspended for unauthorised procedures. I didn't quite understand what they were. What they actually was he was leaving breast tissue and calling it a cleavage-sparing mastectomy, and there's no such thing. So it was just a case of unravelling that over the years. Everything didn't come out at once. I wasn't told all the facts. So it was a question of asking questions, asking more questions. People started to come to me. I was chair of a support group, and I was a fundraiser at that time, and people came to me, told me their stories, and I could piece together the fact that there was a higher incidence of breast cancer. I saw data in 2012 that showed that more than 60% of Paterson patients that had a mastectomy in the NHS had died. Now, this is across all the health sector, so the private sector and the NHS. There were thousands of patients affected. So, I mean, I wrote the book because no one knows the whole story. I mean, The Cost of Trust is about that betrayal of trust, and how I had to really search for myself to find all the facts out. And then, obviously, when I found out in 2013 the extent of my harm, I then went full out to campaign for change and campaign for things to be improved in the health service. For example, a consultant can still rent a room in the private sector. If there's a criminal act, you won't be covered. And most people think that's not the case, but it is. And if something goes wrong, you will be blue lighted to an NHS hospital.
Okay.
I guess I'm really interested to know how it's been for you to go through the process of writing this book, to get to the bottom of the extent of Paterson's crimes, having experienced the downside of it yourself.
In a way, it was quite cathartic because I wrote it in lockdown. So I took myself off and I wrote everything I knew. I spoke to people. I've got lots of evidence backing everything up, lots of data. My background's in aerospace. So for me, it was a frustration that these things were allowed to happen. There were systemic failings in the NHS and in the private sector. And I knew that people should still be here. People died. There was a higher rate of cancer reoccurrence in Paterson patients. And there are inquests into the deaths of 65 patients currently open and being investigated in Birmingham.
What do you think there's an issue? Do you think there's an issue with doctors? Because if you see a doctor or a surgeon or someone who works for, the healthcare system, you kind of trust them. And I think that's why it's so shocking, these stories, because it is a betrayal of people that we are just kind of, I guess, built to trust. And I just wondered if you wanted to kind of reflect on that a little bit.
Absolutely. I think the title of my book, The Cost of Trust, it just says it all, because you're vulnerable. I'd lost both parents to cancer in the previous 2 years to my diagnosis in 2003. Totally vulnerable. When you hear the word cancer, I mean, I've got 3 children. I watched my parents die in an horrific way because, anyone that's been through cancer knows how people suffer. And then to be presented and told you've got cancer, but you need this operation and you're curable, it's just such a betrayal. And I think, most consultants want to do a good job. In the book, I talk about my daughter being saved by the NHS and a stem cell transplant. So this isn't about knocking consultants, knocking the system. It's about wanting improvements. And the book will tell you how to navigate things, how to look for proper consent. Lots of things were totally missed with Paterson. And we were failed, thousands of patients were failed.
Deborah, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your story so bravely.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Now let's talk more about this morning's GDP data and all of the recent political news. Delighted to say we're joined by the Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader, Daisy Cooper. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Your reaction to the GDP data?
Well, we've had 2 growth-crushing budgets in a row now, and I think the results are clear to see. You know, growth has effectively flatlined in the country, and it's having a huge impact on our society. That's why we Liberal Democrats are, calling for a new growth department. We want to split up the Treasury, have a new growth department that will bring businesses and trade into this new growth department that will be based in Birmingham, and that is the first step on the mission to get our economy growing again, because if we can't get growth back into our economy, then we can't end the cost of living crisis.
Tell us a bit more about this idea. So this is kind of moving the department and changing its name?
So it's more than that. So everybody will be familiar with the winter fuel payment scandal, the jobs tax, the family farm tax, the attack on family businesses. In all of these instances, we had a Treasury which has enabled governments to take short-term tax grabs with no regard to the impact on long-term growth and investment and jobs. And we think that this has got to end. So it's all very well for governments to say they want to get growth, but we've seen this government take too many anti-growth measures. So we think it's really important that by splitting up the Treasury, you can take out the bit of the department that looks after public spending, and instead you can combine tax policy and economic policy so that something like the jobs tax can never happen again.
Excuse me. It's really interesting hearing the way you're framing this, because you're talking about a department in the Treasury that has allowed governments, plural, to do these types of things. So essentially you're criticising here the civil servants that work there.
No, civil servants are professionals who work incredibly hard, and it's certainly not their fault. What we've seen is political failure and institutional failure. Now, for decades and decades, people have been talking about breaking up the Treasury because it does too much. It's responsible for fiscal policy, working out tax and spend and the rules about how we spend money. It's responsible for economic policy, how we're going to get growth and what the different levers are for that. And it's also responsible for looking after day-to-day spending of government departments. So it's doing too much. And that means that the last bit, looking after departmental budgets, always trumps the longer-term economic policy. So there is institutional failure there. It's not the failure of the individuals, but the structures don't work. So as a first step towards getting Britain growing again, we want this new growth department that will be aligned, and it will solve a really big problem, which is that people do feel like they're working harder and harder, they're paying more and more in tax and getting less and less, and a new growth department would focus all minds on getting the growth that we need.
I know that you haven't yet mentioned the Chancellor herself as a reason for the lack of growth. I wonder what you made of comments she made yesterday as it relates to the EU. She said, "I'm all up for doing deals with India and the US, but none of them are going to be as big as what we can get through with better trade relations with Europe. We trade almost as much as them with the rest of the world, and I think further integration will require further alignment. I'm up for that." Is this a sea change shift in the position of the government, do you think, towards the EU?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we Liberal Democrats have been saying this for years. We've been saying it for months during this Parliament as well. The fact is that the single biggest growth lever the government has to pull is a better trading relationship with Europe. We have British businesses that are wrapped up in red tape, and every single piece of paper that they have to fill in is another cost to the business, which is another cost to consumers. So this is the single biggest growth lever they could pull. But we're 18 months into this Parliament, and I'm afraid all we hear from the Chancellor is talk about growth and not actual delivery. So instead of just talking the talk, we'd actually like to see them get on and do something and walk the walk as well.
I wanted to ask you about some comments by Jim Ratcliffe in an interview with Ed Conway. There's been quite a lot of focus on what he said in and around immigration. I actually wanted to ask, because you're proposing moving this growth bureau to further north to Birmingham, I want to focus on what he said about the north-south divide, pointing out that manufacturing used to be 20% of GDP in this country in the 1990s. It's now only 8%. And he said that disproportionately has hit the north of England. Do you agree with that assessment? And what would the Liberal Democrats do to reverse it?
So we have got a north-south divide, but I would say it's more profound than that. We've got a north-north and a south-south divide. And even within communities, there are big divisions as well. Even in fairly sort of wealthy areas, there are pockets of poverty. What I would say is that for too long, our economy has been too London-centric. And that's part of the reason why we think that we should put our new department for growth in Birmingham. Birmingham is our second city, and the fact that there is such a yawning gap between our first and our second city is an indicator of the broader economic inequality that we have across the country. So by putting this Department for Growth in Birmingham, we would really hope to focus minds on growing, getting bigger growth in our second city, our third city and all other cities, but also every single region up and down the UK as well.
Daisy Cooper, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader with us there.
Lots of rain around, and let's find out what's going on with it all. Time to look at the weather.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, it's going to turn drier, hooray, brighter and colder into the weekend. But otherwise, the potentially disruptive wet weather is going to continue. Northeastern parts will see a scattering of blustery, wintry showers this morning. Northern Ireland, northern and central parts of Ireland and southwestern Britain can also expect more general rain. And the southwest of Ireland is going to be showery as well. Northern parts will be a bit brighter than recently. The southwest will also brighten later, but it is going to stay largely overcast elsewhere, and we can expect prolonged rain from northern Irish counties all the way through to central southern England, and showers elsewhere, wintry in the north, so it is going to be colder as well. It's going to feel pretty cold in that wind in particular.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
Coming up, we are going to be talking to our very own Deborah Haynes about that NATO meeting that is currently going on in Brussels and get all the latest from that.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Bangkok. These slums, once gripped by fear and death. There is far less bloodshed now, but it hasn't gone away.
Who's asking you to kill?
The police will give me the orders, and after I kill the target, I throw the gun away.
We try our best to uncover and unpick a fast-changing and deeply complex region.
These large waterways provided an excellent source of body disposal.
This is the Buriganga River, where victims who'd allegedly been shot dead were dumped. Sheikh Hasina, how confident are you that she will stand trial?
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that.
We're going to take you to the very heart of a criminal network, going undercover inside Southeast Asia's scam centres for the very first time.
We won't have any problems with police, it's okay.
Just seen Imran Khan leave, and as we understand it, he's just been shot in the leg.
They have decided that the only way they'll allow elections is if I am inside jail or killed.
Sky News get the full story first. Chinese vessels start encircling the boat we're on, blocking its path. The Chinese are now deploying water cannons, firing it directly towards our boat. We've discovered doctors across Delhi dishing out pills like this, claiming they will provide a lifelong cure for homosexuality. Rohingya people fleeing an escalating civil war. The situation here in Cox's is desperate. An already insecure place does feel a lot more precarious.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to. Being a Sky News presenter. Hello and welcome, Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Rich and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Welcome back. NATO defence ministers are in Brussels for a summit. Pressure is on European members of the alliance to dramatically shift their defence spending higher.
So we'll see how that plays out today. This morning, we've already learned that Britain is going to be committing an extra £500 million to air defence systems. But look, it's not just budgets on the agenda. Deborah Haynes got a question to the Secretary-General earlier and asked if he was expecting any tension between Greenland and the United States at the meeting.
What I'm seeing is that as an alliance, we came together to discuss this threat assessment when it comes to the Arctic, which is, yes, Greenland, but also the whole of the Arctic area. So including our new members, our new allies from Sweden and Finland, who bring a lot of experience when it comes to this. Take Norway, which has been in the alliance for so long, I think from the start, if I'm right. But Norway bringing this incredible experience and knowledge when it comes to the protection of the high north. I know this because Dutch Marines have always been training there. So not personally having that knowledge, but my brother and knowing my friends who were training there in cold weather conditions. So we have that collective experience in NATO that we have to defend the Arctic. This is what the Greenland discussion was about, but also the wider Arctic discussion is about. And I think with Arctic Sentry and the trilateral talks ongoing between Greenland, Denmark and the United States, this is all important to make sure that we prevent Russia and China from getting access, but also to protect the whole region. And when it comes to Secretary Hexet, I mean, I'm in regular contact with him and all the senior officials in the United States. Of course, the American president, #1, the overall leader of the US, but also his whole foreign leadership and defense Secretary of War leadership team. But hey, they have to take care of the whole world. This is the United States. NATO is very important, but there is also the Western Hemisphere. There's also the Indo-Pacific. I totally accept it, agree with it. And I had dinner last night with British Colby. I think he has been a consistent voice of, hey, Europe, do more. Because as a United States, we also have to pivot more towards the Indo-Pacific. Let's make sure that collectively we keep Europe strong and Canada and the United States, so NATO territory, but also make sure that we keep our eyes on the Indo-Pacific and not be naive about China. So having him today in the room, I think is really having added value. So I'm happy he's here. I totally accept Pete Hexet also having to take care of all these other responsibilities.
Well, delighted to say that Deborah joins us now. She's in Brussels, asked that question to Mark Rutte just then. Deb, it's interesting because his answer to you and other answers in the press conference were putting on a brave face about the challenges that NATO faces. Maybe we'd expect that in his arrival Q&A, but I guess the question for this meeting is whether behind closed doors they really get it and what they do about it.
Yes, well, you'll remember last year was the first time that Pete Hegseth, as the new then US Defence Secretary, now he's called the Secretary of War, came here to Brussels to meet his NATO allies and really laid down the gauntlet, making very clear that the US was no longer going to be bankrolling and providing the lion's share of security for Europe, and that the Europeans need to heed Donald Trump's warnings and step up. It's noticeable, and this is what I was asking Mark Rutte, that this year Pete Hegseth is a no-show. Instead, his deputy, Elbridge Colby, is here. And obviously you heard Mark Rutte there, the consummate diplomat that he is, making clear that Colby is obviously a very serious player as well, a member of the administration, very invested on ensuring that message of collective defence is heard loud and clear and that the Europeans are doing more. But you can't skirt around the reality that it was only a few weeks ago that we were talking about that extraordinary Davos showdown where you had Donald Trump making those threats about Greenland, and then it was Mark Rutte who really stepped in. He earned this sort of slogan of being called the Trump Whisperer, which he does try to play down, but he did seem to diffuse that. And so it is interesting how right now you've got defence ministers from across the alliance, and that of course includes Denmark, and yes, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, sitting around a table. Yesterday the allies came out and announced this new kind of mission, Arctic Sentry, which is all about bolstering security in the Arctic. But a lot of the questions that the defence ministers, when they arrived, were facing was all about whether this is this just not rebranding rather than actual anything really new happening. And then just one other thing, we have, of course, our own Defence Secretary here. He didn't take questions, unfortunately, but he did make this statement when he arrived.
This afternoon,
I'll be confirming that Britain is providing an extra £500 million in urgent air defence to Ukraine. This is Britain being a force for good in the world, building a new deal for European security within NATO. And I'm proud of the UK's armed forces. I'm proud of the UK's leadership. I'm proud of the UK's commitment to our allies. We will back you. We will defend you. We will fight with you in this new era of threat and hard power.
Really interesting, Deb, hearing there from the Defence Secretary, kind of against what we'd expect him to say, perhaps on arrival. I had a different question as to, clearly all the eyes are going to be there in Brussels today and then Munich for the security conference in the days ahead. Should some eyes be on the Middle East? And even though there's ongoing talks and positive noises about US-Iranian negotiations, what scale of military presence is now there, and what are your sources saying about the likelihood that any of them are used?
Well, I mean, that's like the key marker, isn't it, of the Trump presidency, unpredictability. What has changed compared with a few weeks ago when people first started talking about the potential for a US military strike, a further strike in Iran, is that they didn't have the assets there because they were, a lot of them based in the Asia-Pacific region, also dealing with what was going on in Venezuela as well, out in the Caribbean. And so since then, Trump has called it an armada, but there's been a large American military presence, carrier strike group, jets, warplanes, were able to launch significant airstrikes should the president decide that actually these talks aren't going in the right direction and they want to take it to military action. So yes, you're right, it's really important when we're all focused on what's happening in front of us that actually something else significant could well be boiling behind the scenes.
Deborah, great stuff. As always, going to be lots coming from Deborah the next couple of days. As we said, first in Brussels, then the Munich Security Conference over the weekend ahead.
We'll be getting a new statement from Andy Burnham as well. You're going to have to wait a couple of minutes for it. It's a little tease, but we'll bring you the latest statement from Andy Burnham in just a few moments' time.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Good morning. It is 9 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Rich and Frost.
With Sophy and Wilfred, very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
The Prime Minister tells billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe to apologise for his comments on immigrants using the benefit system. Nigel Farage says Labour is ignoring the issue.
Sean Dyche is out at Nottingham Forest after just 114 days, and he's the third manager to leave the club this season.
Police in Canada say the suspect behind a deadly school shooting was an 18-year-old school dropout and transgender with a history of mental problems, but no word yet on a motive.
Also ahead, we'll discuss a warning that a global disruption bigger than COVID is heading our way and why AI could change everything sooner than we think.
We'll also talk about the challenge of protecting children in the digital world, the government consulting on how to better safeguard young people online.
Very good morning. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, one of the richest men in the UK, part owner of Manchester United, has told Sky News that he thinks the UK has been colonised by immigrants and is costing too much money. The Prime Minister has demanded an apology, saying his comments were offensive and wrong, and the Manchester United Supporters Trust also voicing concerns.
Now, he was talking in a very wide-ranging interview with Sky's Ed Conway, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe also called for courage from politicians to make difficult but necessary decisions on things like the rising welfare bill. He also said that we need somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out. Well, in the last few minutes, we've also had a response from Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. But first, let's listen to what they're all talking about. Here is Sir Jim talking to Ed Conway.
If you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things which are unpopular and show some courage.
And has this government done that?
No, I think they I don't know whether it's just the apparatus that hasn't allowed Keir to do it, or he's maybe too nice. He's a nice. I mean, I know Keir. He's a nice man. I like him, but it's a tough job, and I think you have to do some difficult things with the UK to get it back on track, because at the moment, I don't think the economy is in a good... You can't afford... you can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause...
It's been colonised?
It'll cause... Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. Now it's 70 million. That's 12 million people.
You met recently with Nigel Farage, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in. I think it needs somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out, would be my view.
A little bit of breaking news to bring you, and it's about that double stabbing that we have been talking about in Brent in northwest London. A 13-year-old boy, we can tell you, has been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. That's after 2 boys were seriously injured in a stabbing that happened at Kingsbury High School in Brent in northwest London. A 13-year-old boy now been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. That's according to the Metropolitan Police.
And we'll continue to monitor if there are any further updates on that. Now, just before that, of course, we played you those comments from Sir Jim Ratcliffe and mentioned that Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, had given his view on these comments in just the last 10 minutes or so. He says, the comments go against everything for which Manchester has traditionally stood, a place where people of all races, faiths and none have pulled together over centuries to build our city and our institutions together, including Manchester United, and calling for curbs on levels of immigration is one thing. Portraying those who come here as a hostile invading force is quite another. It's inaccurate, insulting, inflammatory and should be withdrawn. those comments coming in from Andy Burnham moments ago. Mari's here with us to discuss all of this, and obviously the Greater Manchester Mayor's comments, response coming moments ago, the Prime Minister's coming quite quickly yesterday.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister responded very quickly last night, wanted to go straight off the bat with that, and he tweeted out saying, offensive and wrong, Britain is a proud, tolerant and diverse country. Jim Ratcliffe should apologise. And then we had, obviously, Nigel Farage coming out with a slightly different tone, where he said Britain has undergone unprecedented mass immigration that has changed the character of many areas in our country. Labour may try to ignore that, but Reform won't. And then the Lib Dems came out and said something similar to Labour, saying it was wrong and he should apologise. Now, we have actually finally heard from the Tories this morning, which I think is interesting. It's not Kemi Badenoch, but it's the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride. And he said to journalists, I wouldn't use that term colonised. I think it's pejorative and suggests there's some kind of huge negativity around the motivations of those people that come here. And I don't think that's the case across the piece. And then he goes to say, but we do need to be very aware of the impact that migration has, particularly illegal migration, which the government is showing no signs of being able to control. So you can see the Tories there trying to walk a tightrope between not outright condemning Jim Ratcliffe to the point where those who might think he has a bit of a point might actually be persuaded to go over to Reform. They're worrying about that, but nonetheless wants to show that actually he thinks that what Jim Ratcliffe has said is potentially offensive and pejorative. So you can see the Tories are kind of straddling the position between Farage and Starmer there, which is what I was expecting, really.
Yeah, you called it, I have to say. The other thing that I do think is quite important to talk about as well is the other things he was talking about in that interview as a kind of business owner sort of perspective, if you like, saying that we need courage, that he's worried about the state of the economy. And in many ways, you know, the most important story from today is like those growth figures, again, right, 0.1%. We led the programme with them at 7 a.m. when we came on air. And I guess that perhaps is where many people might be looking at this and thinking, well, you know, maybe there is something there.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, is that Jim Ratcliffe makes some valid points about political courage and about whether actually we have politicians in place that are willing to do things that are uncomfortable or difficult or unpopular because they might actually get us out of our kind of economic hole or stagnation spiral that we've been in for a while. And so you can see why some people will resonate with that feeling of we've had a kind of promise after promise after promise of growth, of kind of radical change, of really kind of ripping up things and finding a way to, you know, put rocket boosters up the UK's economy. And we keep hearing all this amazing language, don't we? It sounds fantastic, but we're still waiting for the results. And so he touches on that point and he kind of punches that bruise. But he also does say he doesn't necessarily think that Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage is the answer. He thinks they're both good people, but not necessarily the right people. And he doesn't seem to have the answer either, if I'm being honest.
Ed gave him the chance to slam the Prime Minister and he didn't, or to praise Nigel Farage and he didn't, which I think is an important detail to mention. The full interview, I should say, is on Sky News website. It's about 17 minutes long. And also, the length, they talk about an area that Ed knows tons about as well, which is the chemical sector, the manufacturing sector, both in the UK and in the EU, compared to the US. And he does talk at length about carbon taxes and energy costs as key things to look at as well. Some of those messages a little bit lost because of his use of inflammatory language, which he's only got himself to blame.
Mari, thanks very much indeed. Always good to have you on. We just wanted to bring you a bit of a sports update, sports and politics update. It's about the Ukrainian Winter Olympian Vladislav Herskevich. Now, he is a skeleton player and he was disqualified from the Olympics over this helmet. That helmet there is depicting Ukrainian athletes who have lost their lives in the war in Ukraine, and he's been chucked out, right?
Yeah, and I think this is something that he was talking about a lot yesterday, that the IOC came to visit him yesterday to try and tell him to stop wearing it. They'd asked a couple of times, and he continued to wear it, and he's refused and been thrown out because of it. And, you know, IOC has these rules. You're not allowed to make political statements, but you can totally understand where he's coming from, putting that message for those athletes that he said deserve to have a place in these Olympics ahead of what feels like petty rules.
Yeah, this is it. And we have seen an awful lot of athletes and athlete bodies from Latvia, for example, coming out in support of the wearing of that helmet. I think the one thing that is true is that whatever happens with this decision, he has achieved his aim in raising awareness and the memories of those people who lost their lives, people that he says many of them were his friends.
Anyway, so he's been removed from the Olympics. Now, we know more about the suspect behind the deadly school shooting in Canada yesterday. Police say 18-year-old Jessie Van Rootselaar was a school dropout and a transgender woman and is their main suspect.
So it's the police saying that Jessie was born as a biological male, started transitioning towards becoming a trans female. The suspect's mother and stepbrother were found dead at a nearby home, and 6 people were killed at a local secondary school, including a 39-year-old teacher and 5 students aged just 12 and 13, as John Sparks reports.
It is the last thing you'd expect in small-town Canada. A mass shooting at the local high school in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Here students run for cover after a terrifying 2-hour ordeal. Classroom doors barricaded with desks and chairs and bookshelves. 6 people were killed at the secondary school in Tumbler Ridge. The bodies of 5 were discovered in the library. Another was found in the stairwell. The majority were children. The body of the shooter was also found with self-inflicted wounds.
We understand the community has questions, and we understand they want to know the motive behind this tragic incident. We do believe the suspect acted alone, and there are currently no other outstanding suspects.
The police said the suspect was an 18-year-old school dropout called Jessie Van Rootselaar. She was a transgender woman beginning her transition 6 years ago. Before Van Rootselaar entered the high school, she killed her mother and her stepbrother at the family home.
Police had attended that residence on multiple occasions over the past several years, dealing with concerns of mental health with respect to our suspect. I can say that on different occasions, the suspect was apprehended for assessment and followed.
So apprehended under the Mental Health Act?
Yes.
Canadians associate mass shooting incidents with their neighbours to the south, and the country's Prime Minister appeared visibly moved.
We will get through this, we will learn from this, but right now it's a time to come together, as Canadians always do, in these situations, these terrible situations, to support each other, to mourn together, and to grow together.
Members of the local police detachment were quick to the scene, arriving 2 minutes after the first call, but they didn't prevent this tragedy. They later removed a rifle and a handgun from the school. The victims haven't been identified, but the children were aged between 12 and 13 years old. A teacher was also killed. Difficult questions will follow as a small community and the nation begin to grieve. John Sparks, Sky News.
Horrific story. We'll be covering any more updates that we get throughout the day, of course, on that.
Lots more to come. We're going to be talking more about AI and social media and the challenges ahead, which our next guest says could be as seismic as COVID. Don't want to say that, but it is serious, and we'll be talking about it.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report. And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News. Is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Welcome back. We're talking about social media, specifically for under-16s and whether or not we should be banning it. Because we've heard loads in the last few weeks about whether kids should be taken off social media entirely.
Australia, of course, bit the bullet first, although anecdotally, at least, it appears not to be working fully.
Well, debatable, I think that's fair
Young
to say.
people, some are skipping the ban and VPNs are being used as well.
But what could a ban look like in the United Kingdom? Our political editor Beth Rigby sat down with a minister who would be responsible for it, Liz Kendall, and a group of teenagers to find out what's going on.
Teenagers, smartphones and social media. How we keep our kids safe online has become the question of our time, and one that politicians are now trying to answer.
Hi.
Liz Kendall coming to a school in London that's banned phones to find out what the students think. I don't know if you know Liz, but Liz is the Secretary of State that is going to look after all this, a politician that makes all the decisions around this. So I was not going to say very much, and I was going to leave it to you, Liz, to talk to the teenagers. Well, why don't you start off?
We're thinking at the minute about whether we should ban social media for under-16s. What do you think about all of that, honestly?
Social media is definitely not saving time. Social media is definitely a waste of time. So if we were to find some sort of restriction for it, then it would be very helpful.
You're just constantly scrolling and you have a lot of dopamine by just scrolling all the time. Your brain gets used to that, and then you can only pay attention like, these 6-second intervals.
Do you feel you are still able to see inappropriate things? Because there is legislation that's supposed to stop illegal content for adults, for everybody, and harmful content for children. But there's also the view that this stuff is still getting through.
I've seen a bunch of transphobic and homophobic things online.
OK.
Well, I've seen some racist comments or racist videos featuring cyberbullying.
Would anyone not like a ban?
I think to ban it, it would take away a big part of young people's lives, because it's a big way which people do communicate.
And while this group of 12 to 15-year-olds had different views on social media, where they were in agreement was that a ban wouldn't work. Can I ask as well, you all understand technology much more than your parents. Could you find a way around a ban?
You can use VPNs to say that you're in a different country. My cousin, she lives in Australia. They've got the ban, and already, all of her friends, they've already found a way around it.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
Really appreciate it.
Ever since Australia banned under-16s from using social media last December, the government have been under pressure to act. Ministers have now launched a 3-month consultation looking at how we might better protect kids online. They are looking at a ban for under-16s on social media, putting age limits on inappropriate content and restricting addictive features that lead to doom scrolling. Pressure is coming not just from parents, but from MPs in the Labour Party too, who are demanding the PM takes meaningful action to keep kids safe and deliver real change for millions of families across the country. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Well, Beth, I'm delighted to say, is here with us. A very good morning, Beth.
Nice to see you.
Great to see you. So, do you think...
Nice to be on your set.
Well, you've been here before.
I have.
Good to have you back.
It's very nice to be back.
Do we think the government are really going to pursue this?
Well, look, the first thing to say is there's huge pressure to pursue it, and you had Kemi Badenoch on talking about this. The Conservatives are leading the charge to try and get this social media ban implemented. Australia have done it, Greece are looking at it, Spain are considering it. But actually, the more that you talk to ministers about it and campaigners, the more nuanced it becomes. And I think that talking to Liz Kendall then, we've got a longer piece where you hear from the Secretary of State more. She says that she hasn't made up her mind either way, but she is concerned, as some campaigners are, that if you try and ban it, the kids just find a way around it, the problems go underground, and they don't talk to their parents about it because they know they're breaking the rules and breaking the law. So it doesn't work. People for it say, ban it now, get the social media companies to fix this space, and then you can review that. But their argument would be you don't let kids drive until they're 17 because it can be really dangerous for them, but we are letting them live in this unregulated world where they are being damaged. And I've written a piece and, you know, talking about the effect it has on young girls, about body image and increasing levels of self-harm, the effect it has on young boys, about, you know, toxic masculinity. There are lots of problems with it. And I think what the government are looking at is, does a blanket ban work, or are there other ways that we can better regulate it and be tougher on big tech? And I think that, in a way, is the big political challenge.
You just to say, the piece that you wrote, which is actually quite a personal piece, I should say, about, like, you know, being the mum of teenagers. It definitely spoke to me. Yeah. And I think that, you know, a lot of people, I think that this is the biggest challenge for parenting in the kind of modern day, if you like.
Yeah, well, that's partly why I wanted to do this piece. And I have written a piece that is slightly... I've got 2 teenagers, so it's a bit more personal, but it's because of this shared experience that all of us are having about how do we allow our children to enjoy the benefits of technology, and you cannot stop it, it's in their lives anyway, but protect them. And you've got young children, and you've got young children, and so it affects millions of people. And so I think that part of trying to do some work on it is to try and discuss it, because I think it matters to people, this.
I've got to ask you about Labour.
Yes.
Because it feels like...
What's happened?
Oh, what hasn't
happened? We've got through the week, Wilf, is what's happened.
Can't wait for the weekends, when it
We've
really
got through the week. Yeah, exactly.
The danger zone.
But it's often like a few days after that we found out what really happens. So where are we up to? What went on?
Yeah, so I've done a bit of kind of ringing around, because we had the kind of bombshell of Morgan McSweeney's resignation at 2:08. That resignation statement dropped on Sunday, and then the 24 hours following that, we were very unclear, weren't we, about whether or not Keir Starmer was facing his political death or not, and the cabinet rode in behind him, and he fights to live another day, probably some more weeks, and maybe many more months. But, yeah, what I understand happened was, over the weekend, I've been digging around, and I think that Morgan McSweeney and the Prime Minister had discussed 3 different options about how to handle the crisis as they went into that weekend that ended up in Morgan's resignation, Morgan McSweeney, his Chief of Staff. The first option was that they stay and fight on together, and you know, you've been reporting this, that, you know, Morgan McSweeney has been by Starmer's side since he stood for leadership, so you don't get one without the other. Starmer has never existed politically at the top flight without Morgan McSweeney, so do they stay and fight? The second was that McSweeney leaves Number 10, goes back to party headquarters, goes back to campaigning and running campaigns, and is elevated to the Lords, so he has a political presence, but he's out of Number 10. And the third option was that McSweeney resigned. And as I understand it, they were due to talk on Sunday morning. They were both mulling it over. And that call didn't come maybe as timely as you might have expected, and that when the pair did speak, I'm told that Starmer waffled a bit, he equivocated a bit, at which point sources tell me that Morgan McSweeney said, I don't think you have confidence in me, full confidence in me, and he resigned. And actually, that version of events, which I obviously have checked out, stands up with what some people were telling me later in the afternoon when I was ringing around some of the top people in Labour going, what on earth has happened? Why has Morgan McSweeney gone? And they said the gravity of the situation, this is one very senior source said, the gravity of the situation made the resignation inevitable. So it seems to me that what happened over that weekend was Keir Starmer probably got to the point where, not wanting to do it, I would imagine, felt that he had to let Morgan go. Or Morgan realised that in order for Starmer to fight on. So it's just a bit of lifting the lid on some of these conversations. And when you've worked with someone that closely for many years, it was probably quite hard for both of them, I would imagine.
I can't even believe that option 2 is on the table, which I don't think would have worked if they'd had a resignation, but going to the Lords instead, it would have almost sort of confirmed some of people's
Or even
problems.
going back to campaigning, it's kind of, that was a sort of hybrid version that probably would have satisfied no one.
Exactly, yeah. Brilliant, amazing stuff, Beth. God, it was a crazy day, wasn't it? For Sunday into Monday.
Into Tuesday, into Wednesday.
Wednesday. Today's a little bit calmer.
A bit calmer today.
Beth, great stuff. Good to see you. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, and after the break, we will be talking about AI, as we mentioned earlier, and a guest, author of a new book, The Future of the Species, who says the impact AI is going to have on the workplace is as big as COVID was. So a pretty stark warning coming up from our next guest. Welcome back. It's time to talk about AI once again. There's a lot of fears out there and some hopes as well. Yesterday, you might have seen, or earlier this week, an essay that's gone somewhat viral about the potential bleak impact that AI might have on our futures. And it could be arriving sooner than we all expect. We're joined by Adrian Wolfson, the author of On the Future of Our Species. It's a book he's written recently just come out. Adrian, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Sophie. Thank you.
I mentioned a viral post there, but I guess more importantly, your take is that AI's impact is going to be as seismic as we could possibly imagine, but ultimately a positive one.
Yeah, my take is slightly different because my book on the future of species really looks at how we can use AI to unpick the generative grammar of life itself, the language of life, because life has a language just in the same way as a grammar, just in the same way as German has a grammar or French has a grammar. And if we can understand that grammar, we can become authors of life. In the same way that mathematics turned out to be the perfect language to understand physics and the way planets move and orbit and so on and so forth, it turns out that AI is the perfect language for discerning deep patterns in biology, which we as humans are simply unable to discern.
I mean, it sounds very, very beautiful. I'll be honest, I read the essay and I felt the fear afterwards, right? And mainly about jobs. What it was basically saying is that we are not really preparing for the transformation that is to come. And that anyone whose job can be done on a computer, you should basically be worried about AI being able to do your job better than you can. I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, and obviously the social media article you're referencing is more focused on AI's impact on everyday life. And I think the author of that particular piece was absolutely right that we totally underestimate the power of AI. Of course, you know, AI is really only, I mean, the type of AI that we're all using, ChatGPT and so on, it's been around a couple of years, you know, and it's relying on, I would say, you know, second-generation GPUs. That's the actual architecture that enables this all to happen. Can you imagine what that's going to be like in 20 years' time?
And on jobs in particular, you know, we should be, I guess, kind of clear-eyed about what it's going to mean, right?
I think people, have been caught off guard by this, and as they have with what I write about, which is how AI will be applied to biology. And it might well be, well, I can tell you it will be the case that AI will be designing life. You know, for 4 billion years, all life on Earth has evolved by a process of evolution by natural selection. That lacks foresight, it lacks design, it lacks purpose, it's totally blind, has no concept of the future. All of a sudden, we're at this phased transition, not only in the history of humankind, but in the history of life on Earth. And the purpose of my book is to draw that point to everybody's attention. We all need to know about this. We all need to be able to have an opinion on this. We all need to be able to participate in the debate. And the end result of that is that we can ensure that these incredibly consequential technologies, the likes of which we've never even been able to imagine. I mean, we're talking about technologies that can write life or even redesign.
What do you mean by that? So we're going to be completely disease-free, or what?
Once we understand the grammar of life, we'll be able to reverse engineer our own biology in ways that have never previously been possible.
What does that mean?
So this is accessing DNA, or?
It means it's simply understanding, in the same way that understanding the grammar of German enables you to speak German and write books in German, or understanding the grammar of English enables you to, Dickens to write Great Expectations, or Russian Dostoevsky to write War and Peace. You know, learning the language, understanding the grammar of life will enable us to author new species which can do...
Can I just... I'll be totally honest. I don't actually understand what you mean. What does that mean? AI is going to be able to create new life.
Well, let me give you a simple... So you know what gene editing is?
No, I've no idea.
Okay.
Just come back to basics. Treat me like an idiot.
So gene editing means that you can take a genome and you can just change one letter in the whole sequence of letters. And there are about 7,000 diseases which are caused by a mutation in a letter and which can be corrected by editing. Now, genome authorship, which is what I'm talking about in my book, is very, very different to editing. It's the difference between redlining a document, that's I hand you a document and you kind of edit it and you fill it with red lines and crossing outs and whatever. There's a difference between me saying, Sophie, here's a blank page. Why don't you write a story? But the difference is you're not writing a story in the language of English. You're writing a story in the language of DNA. And just to finish, to get back to your point about medicine, one has to believe that ultimately the human body is a kind of complex machine, not like a man-made machine, but nevertheless a machine. And therefore, we don't have the instruction manual, so that's why we don't know how to deal with them. But if we can compute the grammar of life, it's like computing that missing instruction manual. You know, when you were a kid, I don't know about you, I used to make these model aeroplanes, Messerschmitts and Spitfires, and they came with an instruction manual. Told you how to put the bits together. That's what we lack, and that's what AI can give us.
But I guess removing disease, most people would see as positive, but authoring, you know, some idealistic version of DNA or a human is not, I don't think, for anyone.
Let me give you some of the reasons why I believe biology could be, its ability to design biology could be so useful. In other words, turning biology into a programmable language, a language which biology basically becomes computer code that we can write. Let me give you some examples. At the moment, most of the technologies that form a key part of our infrastructure are built in a destructive way. They destroy the Earth. What we can actually do with biology is we can store information in biology, we can compute in biology.
Can I just ask and get another question?
Yeah.
Are we talking here about, like, when you talk about changing, like, programming and the language, are we talking about, like, creating a new species? Are we talking about curing someone of cancer? Are we talking about selecting a baby? What are we talking about?
You're talking about all of the above.
But the first one, creating a new species. I mean, is that what you're really talking about here? I'm just trying to understand.
Let me give you an example. So, history, evolutionary history, has explored an infinitesimally tiny fraction of possible life. Just imagine that history had taken a different turn and evolution had never discovered the potato or maize or rice or oranges or lemons.
About what AI can do in the future. You're talking about designing a new species.
I'm saying that
it sounds a bit like Frankenstein's lab.
I'm saying that there are species out there that history forgot, just as valuable as rice or rubber plants or potatoes or maize, which could have incredible utility for human beings, which have never been discovered because evolutionary history never had a chance to get there.
Well, because it never existed.
Because they've never existed. And using AI, I believe that one day we'll be able to map out this space of possible species, and they're real. It's like real estate in a sense, just like, you know, America is on the map or Africa is on the map. There are many alternative species out there, some of which could have great utility for humans, some of which could destroy microplastics in the environment, some of which could be used to build buildings instead of conventional materials, some of which can be used to produce energy, some of which we can produce plants which can live in deserts or give higher yields. So there's tremendous opportunity to do good, but in my book, what I make really clear, and this is why I wrote the book, is we have to be aware of responsibility,
it's a key point.
Transparency.
We're out of time, but it's been really, honestly, so interesting to talk. My mind is blown. Consider my mind blown. Thank you very much
My
indeed
pleasure.
for coming
Thank
on.
you so much.
Thanks so much.
I love it. Off you go.
Off you go.
Too quick. See you later. I don't know what to say.
We need to brush up on our grammar.
Yeah.
The grammar of life.
It's going to change. It just feels like a whole nother life, basically.
It's been a tumultuous week in Westminster, especially for the Prime Minister. Last week, he said Peter Mandelson continuously lied during the vetting process of him becoming ambassador in the US.
And this week, he's saying his former communications chief, a man called Matthew Doyle, did not give a full account of his actions before he was nominated for a peerage. After it emerged, he campaigned for Sean Moulton, a Labour councillor, former Labour councillor, who was charged with possessing indecent images of children. Well, he's now been suspended from the Labour whip in his new role in the Lords.
Let's speak about it all to Gabrielle Pogrund, who's the Whitehall editor at the Sunday Times. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
This second issue that we're talking about, frame for us in your eyes how serious it would be if it was standalone and if we hadn't started the week with a moment where all of his MPs decided, after perhaps some delay, to back him and stand behind him?
It's a great question. I think that the real essence of the political trouble for Starmer in relation to this case is the symmetry between Matthew Doyle's enablement and Peter Mandelson's appointment as ambassador. I think the fact is I happened to break the story last year, I asked Number 10 whether they were aware of the... I knew they were aware of the association between Doyle and this convicted paedophile because it had been brought to the attention of Downing Street. And I knew that and I reported that. But I asked them, well, what did you do? Who investigated? What questions were asked? And what evidence did you assemble before determining that it was appropriate to proceed with the peerage? To which answers there came very few from Number 10. As it happens, the person I was WhatsApping at the time, Tim Allen, Doyle's successor of Starmer's Director of Comms, who resigned last week, he was actually the author of this so-called investigation. He never mentioned that minor detail to me. But Downing Street basically, funnily enough, he told me he was at the football and was too busy to reply, but a colleague would pick up. They too didn't divulge the minor detail that the comms team, and by the way, a political appointment and a new Labour veteran, had investigated Doyle, former member of the comms team, a political appointment, and also an erstwhile member of Tony Blair's Downing Street operation. So the whole thing stank, but it was only now, because of the political trouble that Starmer faces and the Mandelson issue, that they've realised they're very sorry indeed.
Just to say that, you know, Gabriel spearheaded the story. Like, it was just one of the many scoops that you'll see in the Sunday Times from Gabriel, and I'm really glad to have you on because, frankly, I have been struggling a bit with the timeline of all this because we've talked on this programme to, you know, Labour ministers, and we've asked about the timeline for Matthew Doyle, and we've mentioned the front page of the Sunday Times, which your story was on there. And the defence has been like, oh, yeah, but the announcement came before that, we didn't know about it. But I guess the key thing is they didn't sign off, they didn't rubber stamp the announcement until after the front page of the Sunday Times, when you made the association clear, which I guess is what I'm slightly struggling with here, right?
That's right. I suppose just to offer a very abbreviated version of the chronology, in early December it was announced that Doyle was going to get this peerage. Days later, on the sidelines of a Scottish Labour gala fundraiser, McSweeney was directly warned about, Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's ex-chief of staff, was warned about this matter by the General Secretary of Scottish Labour. Jill Cuthbertson, who's now succeeded McSweeney, was also told about it. That prompted this so-called investigation. Then came our front page, and then there was a weeks-long period after the... I'm not trying to be too facetious, but I can't quite call it an investigation. Whatever this internal exercise was, you have the internal exercise, the Sunday Times story. There are then weeks before the letters patent are sealed. This is one of these slightly abstruse bits of paperwork at the intersection of government and monarchy. Essentially, it's the document which gives effect to the peerage. The clerks of the House of Commons have now said that it was always possible for Downing Street to contact the royal household and say, we don't wish for this document to be issued. We'd like to press pause, send it back to vetting. That didn't happen, and I think therein lies a decision, or at least indecision, that matters.
Yeah, there was an opportunity.
But bring it back to us then for the actual, whether it should or shouldn't, the actual pressure this puts on the Prime Minister.
Well, in straightforward terms, why is this so toxic for him? Well, firstly, as you outlined at the outset, Starmer's attempting to condemn the last few weeks of controversy to the rearview mirror. He's refreshed his Downing Street team. He's attempting to reset. He's got a by-election coming up. At the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party meeting last night, one MP complained that on the doorstep she was being told that Labour was the party of paedo-protectors. So, you know, Starmer needs more controversy about his judgment in relation to alleged paedophile protectors, like he needs a hole in the head. It's bad news for him. It also brings the story back into Downing Street and back into those questions of his judgment. Obviously, Starmer, presents himself as a man of unimpeachable, not just integrity, but of forensic judgment. I think the problem here is that, you know, it's just another story which poses significant questions of him, and also, because of the weird way our constitution works, it's bloody difficult to remove a peer from the House of Lords. So you've got this weird mismatch between the government's stated position, which seems to be that they would like Doyle to be stripped of the peerage, but then the procedure and the investigation, and like the Mandelson thing, I think will rumble on. And I think that is the problem with these stories, when you don't have a straightforward position. And by the way, you didn't need a periscope to see around this particular corner last December, but when they fail to address it and all the questions start mounting, it becomes quite difficult to get yourself out of that bind.
Thanks very much. It's been great to have you on. It really has. Thank you, Gabriel.
Let's have a look at the weather.
I hope we haven't forgotten anything.
Travel insurance, I tick that box.
Yeah, but remember what you forgot last year.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
It's going to turn drier, brighter and colder into the weekend. So a little bit of smidgen of good news, but otherwise the weather is going to be here for a while yet. Northeastern parts will see a scattering of blustery, wintry showers this morning, while Northern Ireland, northern and central parts of Ireland and southwestern Britain should expect more general rain. The southwest of Ireland will be showery. Northern parts will be brighter than recently, and the southwest will brighten later, but it will stay largely overcast elsewhere. Expect some prolonged rain from northern Irish counties through to central and southern England, and showers elsewhere, wintry in the north. It's going to be colder generally with quite a raw wind.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes and we'll be talking about behaviour in schools.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
I think, honestly, if there's one job that I had more respect for than any others, it'd be teaching. Widely considered one of the hardest jobs in the world. And look, we know that teachers are facing increasing workloads, long hours, new challenges like navigating smartphones, not easy, and also social media influence as well.
And now, new analysis, this from the National Foundation for Educational Research, is warning that increasing issues with bad behaviour in classrooms is driving teachers away from the profession.
Well, thought we'd talk about this a little bit more just to finish off the programme. Simon Hart, head teacher at Spring West Academy in Felton, so that's West London, joins us now.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How difficult is behaviour in the classroom?
I'd say behaviour is really challenging, and added to that, all of the pressures in terms of workload, well-being on teachers. Yeah, I think it is a significant challenge, and I think the report highlights some, important facts and gives the public an idea of what teachers do.
And it's triggering a lot of teachers to leave the profession.
Yeah, I think recruitment and retention is a crisis. At Spring West, we're in a good position and we're doing things that are working. Our retention's strong. And I think what we're doing could be done in other schools and other settings, because the behaviour is the reality of where England is at the moment. So I think we've got to shape it differently. I mean, the report talks about leadership, supporting teachers, and that's what we've always done. So we adopt what's called a servant leadership model at Spring West and take the pressure off teachers. We, as SLT, pick up the detention centralised.
So senior leadership team.
Senior leadership team and other leaders. But, yeah, for example, if students are misbehaving, we take them from the teachers. We support those teachers because learning's the main thing. We want them in the classroom delivering great lessons.
And I guess that's the thing as well, is, you always kind of worry about teachers just having to spend 80% of the time on the problem children, which isn't actually fair on the kids who are trying to turn up and learn,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And also, I think the other thing is perspective. This report talks about the perspective. So 97% of students want to do the right thing. And it's those loud 3% who are challenging us with increasingly complex needs in society. Some of them should not be in mainstream settings, and we're having to take that burden and do our best.
Just on the mainstream setting thing, I'm interested in that because it is a bit of a hot topic at the minute, right? Because the government is saying they want more children with what they declare special educational needs in mainstream schools.
Yes.
Is that necessarily a good thing? Sorry, I know I'm probably don't go down the political route, but I'm interested what you think.
It's not the route that I would take. I think that we need special schools, we need PRUs, so pupil referral units. I think we need the right setting for students. I think if we get it wrong, we're failing both. We're failing those students who are trying to do the right thing and those students who can't because of their needs. So,
do you think that's what the government policy might risk doing then?
I think possibly.
Okay.
Where do you stand on a smartphone ban?
Yeah, so we have what's called a whale day. So we have pouches that are fantastic. So the students come in and in their first period, they put their phones in pouches. They're locked for the day. And it works really, really well. We introduced that. It's made a huge difference.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah, I guess that's it. And then it means that, if you need it to try and find your way home or call your mum after school, you can do it, but it's just not actually there. You can't access it.
And again, 97% of them do it, understand it, appreciate it, thank us for it. And a lot of them were asking for it. So I think we shouldn't forget them, And going back to solutions, I think character education is something that we do at Spring West really well, and it's something schools could do, and a lot of schools are doing. I think students now need to be taught good character, virtuous behaviour, and I think that's something that schools in settings like Spring West could adopt easily. And there's the Jubilee Centre at Birmingham have a framework for free that schools can adopt.
I was interested about your whole thing about supporting teachers, and I just wonder if sometimes you feel that teachers feel unsupported. In other words, if there's an altercation in class and they have to break up a fight, or you've seen it sometimes with other issues in schools that they're almost worried about someone putting in a complaint against them, and actually that is it must be quite a difficult balance for teachers dealing with kids with complex needs.
Yeah, I think
parents, right?
You've got it perfect. That's the reality, and what we do at Spring West is we just. Our role as leaders is to establish the conditions so that teachers can teach great lessons every period, every day. And what we want is students and staff to flourish. So as leaders, we take the burden, we take the responsibility. And then what we're facing now is with AI, increasing vexatious complaints coming in weekly. And again,
you think AI is actually helping?
Oh, it's absolutely enabled.
So parents are using AI to write complaints to the school and send it in?
Prevalently. It's everywhere.
Goodness, that is something, isn't it?
It sounds like you're across most of the challenges.
Yes.
Do you think many schools are?
No. I think it's a real challenge, and I think context matters. So at Spring West, we've got a culture of kindness. Our approach, we don't believe in silent corridors. That's our context. But in other contexts, silent corridors is working great. So I think the work with the Behaviour Hub is good. It's good work, and it's mentioned in the report, and it should be, grown. There's good, messages that are coming through, but context really matters. And I think for us, we teach leadership, explicitly teach it, and I think that's what all schools should do. And there's great people out there who can support.
I found that fascinating. Thanks very much
Thanks.
for coming in.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so
good.
much. Have a great day.
Lots of news coming up, of course, after this short break. One story we wanted to get back in. We thought we'd end on a bit more of a positive note, right? Outdoor dining returning to London, apparently this summer.
Yeah, this is based on whether or not the Mayor of London is going to really embrace this or not. It's something that alfresco dining, of course, has been more widespread since the pandemic. It looks like they're going to allow 32 boroughs in the City of London to have some outdoor hospitality, nightlife licensing, and great.
Yeah, and not just London. There was some planning reforms last year which made it easier for cities to do this. Only problem is, what about all the bloody rain? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that. Apologies if I'm not.
It's all right, you're not the first person in the last 20 minutes to do it.
Apologies for that language, but I am quite sick of the weather and I'm worried about the impact it could have on things like outdoor dining.
We are out of time here. Thanks so much for watching Sky News Today. Is up next.